Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to ask you to take a seat, please, because it's time to start. Hello, can I ask you please to take a seat, and really it's time to start. So, thank you very much. Welcome. Before we start today's evaluation meeting, as chair of the Agri Committee, I would like to express our sincere condolence and solidarity with the victims of the horrible floods in Spain. Our hearts and thoughts are with you, and we wish you much strength, courage, and confidence in these difficult hours. At the same time, we want to say, you are not alone. Thank you. So, I would like to welcome on behalf of the Committee on Agriculture and Rural Development, Mr. Christophe HANSEN, Commissioner-designate for Agriculture and Food. Welcome. I should point on the importance for the Agri Committee of the responsibilities that could be entrusted to the Commissioner-designate. He would have to strengthen the competitiveness, resilience, and sustainability of the farming sector, while the latter must face multiple changes ranging from adaptation to climate change to unfair competition from third countries. Mr. HANSEN, the member of our committee, are therefore eager to know your vision and your proposals for European agriculture and its developments. I would like to recall that during the evaluation of the hearing, coordinators of the Agri Committee will have to state clearly whether they consider the Commissioner-designate to be qualified both to be member of the college and to carry out the particular duties he has been assigned. I would like to recall that before the hearing, the Commissioner-designate replied in writing to questions prepared by our committee. The answers have been distributed to the members in all languages. Please know that the Committee on Legal Affairs has assessed the question of potential or actual conflict of interests and raised no objection to the holding of the hearing. Finally, Mr. HANSEN, I would like to stress that we acknowledge your response to the horizontal written questions and your readiness to cooperate with the European Parliament. This is particularly important in the context of the revision of the framework agreement between the European Parliament and the Commission, in particular regarding your engagement to be regularly present in committees and plenaries to follow up on Parliament's legislative initiatives and to timely share information to Parliament as co-legislator and arm to the budgetary authority. We count on the full implementation of these commitments and emphasizes the Commission's role as the honest broker in the legislative procedures and interinstitutional negotiation, ensuring equal treatment of Parliament and the Council. We equally count on your full cooperation to inform our committee in advance of all upcoming proposals with detailed justifications for those requiring urgent action. This will ensure transparency and allow Parliament to properly exercise its prerogatives. Regarding the structure of the debate, I have to draw your attention to a few essential points. The Commissioner-designate will make an opening oral statement of no longer than 15 minutes. He will also have 5 minutes at the end of the meeting for a closing statement. After the introduction, we will turn to the questions from members. The hearing will be structured in 4 rounds. First round of political group coordinators will 5 minutes slots each. That is to say 1 minute for the question and 2 minutes for the answer from the Commissioner-designate, with a possibility of follow-up question from the same member, no longer than 1 minute, and with 1 minute for the reply. The second round of questions will 3 minute slots each, based on the overall distribution of speaking time among the political groups, including a representative from the non-attached members. Third round of questions by the chair of the invited committees will 3 minute slots each. A final round of questions by political groups in reverse order, also with 3 minute slots each. All slots of 3 minutes will be divided into 1 minute for a question and 2 minutes answer from the Commissioner-designated. Thank you, dear Mr. Hansen and dear colleagues, for respecting this schedule. Please know that interpretation is provided in 22 languages. Interpretation in Maltese is not available. All speakers can therefore use their own language. Speakers should keep in mind that what they say is interpreted and that they should therefore not speak too quickly. The confirmation hearing is streamed live on the Parliament's internet website. It will also be possible to access a video recording of the hearing a few hours after the end of the hearing. Dear colleagues, please respect the time of your questions. If you are speaking more than 1 minute, I will turn off your micro. We have 3 hours, and after that, the lights turn off. So, and now I give the floor to the Commissioner-designate for his presentation for a maximum of 15 minutes. Mr. Hansen, the floor is yours.
Good evening to everybody, and thank you, Madam Chair. And let me thank you also for your words on the catastrophe in Spain. I can join you in saying that my thoughts are with the victims, are with their families, and are as well with the rescue teams. I think all European solidarity is needed to really help people in need, and it will be one of our utmost attentions over the next months to help the people in Spain. Honourable members, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I am honoured to be here tonight with you to discuss the future of EU agriculture, food system, but as well rural areas. A future that I believe we can forge together. I grew up on a family farm on the border between Belgium and Luxembourg. So I know the good times and the bad times of farming. I well remember my father, and after him, my brother, struggling with paperwork when all they really wanted to do was work their land and take care of their animals. Honourable members, our union depends on its 9 million farms, more than 90% of which are family farms like ours. Together with the wider agri-food sector, these farms provide us with safe and high-quality food. They guarantee food security and play a crucial role in maintaining the beauty and diversity of our landscapes. They keep our cultural heritage alive and our rural areas vibrant. But our farmers are under pressure to carve out a living from their work, under pressure from climate change and extreme weather events, from geopolitical instability and unfair competition, and from increasing regulatory complexity and administrative burden. Farmers felt their voices were not heard, so they took to the streets earlier this year. This is why I intend to be a boots-on-the-ground commissioner. I will use every opportunity to visit farms and farmers throughout the member states. The strategic dialogue on the future of EU agriculture was much needed to bring a very diverse group of stakeholders to the table and leave the climate of sharp polarization behind us. If confirmed as Commissioner, I will build on its consensus and transform it into a clear perspective. I will follow up on the dialogue's recommendations, including, as recommended by the strategic dialogue, through the European Board on Agri-Food, which I will soon establish and convene. I will do this in close cooperation with this committee and this House. And I will work just as closely with all fellow commissioners who are part of the food system cluster. As the dialogue concluded, farming needs to be sustainable in all three dimensions: economic, environmental, and social. We need better policy coordination on topics such as climate adaptation, water resilience, animal welfare, and the many other initiatives that directly impact farmers and consumers. These principles will guide me when preparing the vision of agriculture and food that the President of the European Commission asked me to prepare in the first 100 days of the mandate. It will consider a plurality of views, and the whole agri-food value chain will be included. It will be a shared roadmap for future initiatives, and not a top-down, take-it-or-leave-it blueprint. The vision needs to start from a central question. How do we attract a future generation of farmers that will take up the mantle from the current generation as custodians of our countryside? In line with the conclusions of the dialogue, the vision needs to look at how farming can be economically viable, environmentally sustainable, and socially responsible today, tomorrow, and also in 2040. Let's take a closer look how we can do that. First and foremost, generational renewal will be central in my thinking for the next 5 years, because only 10% of farmers are currently under the age of 40, and therefore we are heading towards a demographic cliff. If confirmed as Commissioner, I want farming to entice young people once again. They need a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. And this is why I intend to develop a strategy for generational renewal in close cooperation with the young farmers. We also need to support the development of a land observatory. It is crucial to promote transparency and accountability in the land market to improve access to land for young farmers. But who will enter or continue farming if they cannot make a decent living out of it? Farmers' income is only around 60% of EU average. Therefore, income support remains key. But all the farmers I meet so far, they would rather prefer to get a fair price for their product than rely just on in public support. They need to be fairly remunerated by the market, and that should be our main goal. Global competition, on top of rising energy and input costs, puts this objective even further out of reach. And I have heard too many farmers say that they will struggle to pass on a viable enterprise to the next generation. Honourable members, President von der Leyen said that it is vital that farmers have a fair and sufficient income, and that we will defend an income policy for Europe's farmers. I can tell you I stand fully behind that. And to this end, we must draw on all sources: income from the market, public income support, investments, and alternative sources of funding. Support through the CAP remains essential for farmers. It secures them a fair income, rewards them as well for ecosystem services, and it compensates them for work in areas with natural constraints. It supports investments into climate mitigation and adaptation, and it helps to meet our environmental objectives. It is crucial that our farmers should not be forced to systematically sell their products below the production costs. We need to beef up their bargaining position. Honourable members, we also need to support the competitiveness of our entire food value chain. Strengthening competitiveness means investing in research and innovation. It also means supporting small and medium-sized enterprises. We need to foster the development and an on-farm deployment of new cutting-edge technologies such as precision farming and such as biocontrol. That's how good farming practices can help reconcile environmental, social and economic sustainability. For the year 2022 alone, the European Investment Bank estimated the financing gap for agriculture at around 62 billion euros. We need public and private investment to finance and de-risk the sustainability transition. We need new initiatives. The EIB funds can help support the CAP and unlock and de-risk private capital. This is especially true for young farmers and women in agriculture. They are most at risk and yet find it most difficult to obtain loans or additional investments. This must clearly change. I know from experience how important global trade is for the competitiveness of our agri-food sector. Last year, agri-food exports totaled nearly 230 billion euros. But we all agree this trade must be fair and allow our farmers to compete on a level playing field. One of the main concerns expressed by our farmers during their protests was that we hold our own producers to higher standards than non-EU producers. This can also lead to social, environmental and production leakage to other parts of the world, and I believe we have to avoid that. If confirmed as Commissioner, I will work with my future colleagues to address these issues and see how to ensure the application of our standards by any imports in compliance with the WTO rules. Let me turn now to the latter part of my future job title, food. Farmers, producers and the wider agri-food sector all play a part in delivering abundant, delicious and nutritious food for our citizens. And that is something we can be proud of. We must build on this success with a holistic approach to transform our food systems and make them resilient for the future. This means changing the way we produce, we process and sell and consume our food. Farmers also need consumers appreciating and willing to pay for the production of high quality and safe European food products. Concretely, we should take into account the need to promote sustainable supply chains in the framework of the revision of public procurement rules. We have to step up our fight to reduce and better reuse food waste, to name but a few issues. But we should always remember that European action is not automatically a silver bullet. Many policies around food remain national, regional or even local. EU action is, however, indispensable when it comes to addressing climate and environmental challenges, and no one knows this better than our farmers, as extreme weather events are putting their livelihoods at risk ever more frequently. And last week's devastating floods in Spain, I think, was the example that they have and want to contribute to the protection. Farmers see the change, they live with it, and they deal with it. And I believe they are our first line of defense in the fight against climate change, biodiversity loss and pollinator decline, to name but a few. I know that farmers want to contribute to the fight against climate change. Under the current CAP, already 1/3 of the budget goes to environment and climate measures, and 70% of EU farmland is already covered by eco-schemes. The full impact of the national CAP plans in force only since 2023, I have to remind it, still needs to be fully factored in this calculation. And we need to further unlock agriculture's potential for carbon storage. More can be done, but farmers' efforts need to be encouraged by appropriate incentives. Our vision for the future should therefore double down on the logic of the strategic dialogue. Agriculture and the preservation of nature can go hand in hand. Organic farming, I believe, is a good example for that. But one-size-fits-all approach is not the way forward. Environmental pressures are different from region to region and from sector to sector. We also need to better measure and record the efforts our farmers are already making today. And to this end, we need to support the development of a user-friendly benchmarking system to help farmers deal with sustainability requirements and, at the same time, reduce red tape. Last but not least, our rural communities need to thrive. They need better access to services and opportunities which those in urban areas often take for granted. The circular bioeconomy can play an important role in this regard. Agriculture and forestry should not only produce biomass, but also add value. Scaling up the bioeconomy through the investment support in rural areas is therefore essential. And cooperative entrepreneurship in rural areas will be key to ensure that farmers and foresters benefit from bioeconomy developments. Specific attention must go to employment and economic development in remote rural areas, on islands, and especially in our outermost regions, for which the treaties require specific efforts. Honourable members, the common agriculture policy will remain the frame that holds this vision in place up to 2027 and beyond. I believe the CAP strategic plans will continue to prove their worth. They enable us to contribute to farmers' income as well to achieve high environmental and social objectives. The treaty requires us to develop and maintain an ambitious common agriculture policy. We need stability, predictability, and simplification where possible. We must find the right balance between incentives, investments, and regulation. And we need to ensure that our farmers are not burdened by excessive bureaucracy, and I believe the previous Commission made a good first step towards simplification. If confirmed as Commissioner, I will closely monitor the impact of any new measures on our farms and farmers, also with the necessary impact assessments. Honourable members, the CAP safeguards our food sovereignty, supports our rural areas and contributes to the sustainable transition. It is not just a policy for farmers, it is a policy for all Europeans. I have met many of you over the past weeks to discuss agriculture and the challenges. And today I'm keen to exchange with you views on the future of agriculture. If confirmed, this is how I intend to continue working in close cooperation with this committee and in close cooperation with this House. I will always cherish the dialogue and discussion to nourish as well the future policy initiatives. I hope I will earn your trust today, and I'm looking now forward to this fruitful exchange and the many questions you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Hansen. And we now move to the first round of questions from coordinators. I remind you that each slot is maximum 5 minutes, 1 minute for the question, 2 minutes for the reply, and 1 minute for possible follow-up question, and 1 minute for the reply. So, and first I would like to give the floor to Herbert Dorfmann.
Commissioner-designate, you have got a very important portfolio here, agriculture and food, and you've got it at a very decisive moment for the sector as well. You pointed out the recent farmers' protests that we've had. We know that they've not been happy with our policies and they've pushed for strategic dialogue. We've now got that, and you've said that within 100 days we're going to have a report on the future of agriculture, and we'll have a proposal for future developments of the CAP in Europe. So my question to you is, how do you imagine you'll be able to bring this puzzle together? How are we going to be able to work on the proposals that come from the strategic dialogue? And then with the autonomy of Parliament, of course, we're going to have to work together in the next few months and years to come, and we hope we'll have good dialogue.
Mr. Hansen, please.
Vielen Dank, Herr Dorfmann, für die
Thank you very much, Mr. Dorfmann, for that very important question. You quite rightly said that in the first 100 days I'm to lay out a vision for the future of the agricultural sector and also the food sector, of course, in Europe. And I will very clearly there focus on the various different areas that I highlighted in my mission letter. Obviously, strategic dialogue is one of them, but we've also got the Letter report, the Draghi report, and now we've got the Minister report covering food security. So I think it's clear that all four of those reports are going to need to be looked at, and we're going to have to look at what is possible and what isn't. Now, when it comes to strategic dialogue, there are certainly a lot of important areas where there will be consensus, but there are also a lot of areas where there will be less consensus because the text was worded a little bit more vaguely. I'm thinking here about Agri-ETS, for example. There's been a lot of speculation about that and about what will be included and won't. I think on Agri-ETS, it isn't yet entirely clear. New Zealand, for example, tried to create this kind of system, but we're going to have to see exactly what happened with them because, of course, that never got implemented. So that's going to have to be taken into account, as well as various other points from the strategic dialogue. We'll have to, of course, look at the budget. That it's very clearly important that there does need to be continued budget for agriculture. There are various other sources, however, that need to be looked at so that we can provide additional support for agriculture. Particularly, I'm thinking about the EIB. I mentioned that very briefly. But I think here we can talk about carbon farming, for example, and how additional funds can be made available. Now, I'm not able to cover all of that, of course, in 2 minutes, but I'm sure that'll come up again later in the hearing.
Question, please.
Thank you. Yes, just once again, you raised the issue of money and strategic dialogue. That did speak about needing an adequate budget and talked about the Just Transition Fund as well. At the same time, the Commission has been talking about completely new positioning for the CAP budget. There's also, of course, the ideas from all of the reports that you mentioned, and they all suggested that we need simplification, particularly in agriculture. We've got 9 million companies that are involved here, and we have to look at what we can do to try to reduce red tape as far as possible. So maybe you could just cover those 2 points, budget and how you imagine you're going to be able to enact policies but ensure that you don't increase red tape.
Also, ich denke...
Thank you very much for the follow-up question. Well, I think on the issue of budget, this is something which has come out from leaks. It's not an official channel, and so I don't really want to speak about that. But we've had guidelines from the President herself, and she's been very clear, and I mentioned this before in my introductory remarks, talking about income support for our farmers. This is something which is in the strategic dialogue, and we should implement this together. I absolutely intend to do that, and I will discuss this if I am confirmed as Commissioner. We do, of course, need to have a dedicated budget for the CAP. On Just Transition, I think this is something we need to look at. Before we create new funds, we need to first look at ensuring we're using what we've got. The Just Transition Fund is meant for all sectors, and money is available there. And so I think we need to, when we're looking at simplification, I think we can build on what was done in the spring. We need to analyse, looking at where there are still possibilities. For example, looking at lump sums and where we might be able to make short-term simplifications for the future. Thank you.
Colleague Dario Nardella, SND, please.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, innovation is fundamental for the future of European agriculture, specifically competitiveness and environmental sustainability, but also economic and social stability of the sector. What do you intend to do in the upcoming 5 years to draw more investment, new investment, and guarantee the transition to sustainability? How do you intend to guarantee that European agriculture remains competitive globally, and what measures will you take to encourage innovation and make it accessible to farmers? You, sir, stated that you are open to opening up the CMO. Could you give me more details on this aspect, and would you have a new review of the UTP legislation, and how can you make sure that it would be enforced better in member states to make sure that farmers are treated equally across Europe?
Thank you very much, Mr. Nardella. Again, a lot of questions in one question. First, on innovation, I think innovation is crucial, and I mentioned the enormous gap that we currently have. The EIB estimated at more than 62 billion per year that is missing in investment, and if we don't invest and if we don't modernize our production system, well, the competitiveness is going down, and therefore we need to bridge that gap. And I think the EIB itself can help, and I think I will go to the EIB and argue for new financing possibilities, loans for innovation, loans for the next generation farmers that will de-risk as well that capital. I think that will be very important to get additional funds, because if we are now not investing, well, we will be behind the others, and that would be a huge mistake. You mentioned the CMO and the Unfair Trading Practices Directive as well. Two very important points to strengthen the revenues for our farmers. In the CMO, precisely, I believe we can do more and we have to do better in the strengthening of our producer organizations. We have, in some member states, it is working quite well, but we have other member states and as well sectors which are divergent, that there we are lacking behind, and we have to encourage as well. And I believe we can strengthen this part of the producer organizations in the current CMO, and we can do this quite quickly, and I will work on that very in the first days of my hopefully future mandate on the Unfair Trading Practices Directive. It is a very recent legislation. We need to assess next year what is working well, and this is ongoing work. What is going well, what is not going well, so we have to wait before we make a huge change. But nonetheless, I think there are issues that we can address in the short term, namely the cross-border implementation, because I believe there is a margin to do better when it comes to cooperation between the national authorities. So this as well for the first days of the next mandate.
Grazie.
Thank you. I should like now to move to the aspect of workers in the farming value chain. We're talking about 30 million people here. A significant of a part of these still experience difficult working conditions in terms of wages, and also in terms of the fact that they have informal labor and there are abuses there. Mr. Commissioner, how will you guarantee in your vision that the prospect of workers in the entire sector will be fully factored in at all times? Moreover, could you give us a tangible commitment to make sure that the social partners and representatives of business will be involved in the future European Agro-Food Board?
Thank you very much, Mr. Nardella. I believe that workers are very central, and you mentioned the numbers yourself. We have to take care of them because agriculture and food production is not working anyhow without the qualified workers in there. So they need to be held to the same high standards as the rest of the economy, and I think there it is crucial as well that our national labour authorities are better controlling on the ground what is happening. And I think there, in some parts, I have the impression maybe the eyes are closed halfly, and that is not in the interest of our workers. We need to do this better. Social conditionality is a very important point as well in the current national strategic plans in the CIP. I look to my left, Maria Neuschel was not very innocent on that point to bring it in. So this needs to be further strengthened, and we will see by next year if it is really working. So this would have as well be very high on the vision. Then my time is already over, but I think you mentioned as well the involvement in the future European Board on Agriculture and Food of the workers already in the strategic dialogue. We had the European Federation of Food, Agriculture, Tourism, trade unions. They have to now, when the call will be made to join, they have to apply, and then I'm quite sure that they will be on board as well for the follow-up.
Okay, thank you very much, and I would like to give the floor to colleague Stancanelli from Patriots.
Grazie, Presidente. Grazie.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you very much, Commissioner. I would like to say, in the light of the unfortunate habit that there is in the Parliament of following this cordon sanitaire, could you tell us how you intend to work with us as a group? It's a very important topic, the CAP, and the whole question of agriculture, we need responses immediately. The CAP ought to be much simpler, much more streamlined, and we need to look at this whole question of conditionality. The farmers can't survive on the assistance that they get, but we have also got to recognise that what has been happening over recent years is completely unacceptable and is not leading to a sustainable future. There are many member states which have a lot of discretion in terms of the strategic planning they do. So could you tell us, looking towards 2025, when the member states will have to produce annual reports on CAP implementation and compliance, what you would intend to do by way of evaluation of that data? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Stancanelli, for your question. On your first question, I of course stand ready to discuss with every member of this Parliament because everybody here is as well democratically elected. But I also say that we need to share our common European values in those ideas that we express. Also, they need to contribute to a European unity that is very important, and we have to defend as well our common European values. And those are, on the one side, of course, the rule of law, the European democracy, and as well the just and lasting peace in Ukraine. Those will be, for me, the very important criteria for cooperation. Then, coming to your question on the simplification, I, of course, hear what you are saying on the complexity and the administrative burden. I also have to remind you that we need, when we pay public money to our farmers, this needs in some way to be controlled. And here in this House, it's the Cont Committee, but as well the plenary that is in charge of controlling and checking that payments are done in a proper manner. And therefore, of course, a certain kind of administrative burden is needed to be able to pay out that money. But nonetheless, I think the political guidelines by the Commission are very clear as well on this, that simplification needs to happen, and this is a horizontal priority. And there we have to work personally, I will have to work with the Commissioner on Environment, but as well with the Commissioner for Simplification very closely together. We have overlaps. We need to do that better. And I believe that the benchmarking system that is as well proposed and on the agenda for the next time, it is a voluntary one, will help our farmers to deal better with the requirements and at the same time reduce red tape. That should be in the interest from all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I just go into two further aspects of this? The rules on the green targets and objectives are often perceived as extremely complex by those at the front line and member states, and indeed the Court of Auditors said it's difficult to deal with all the documentation. I'm thinking of direct payments and all the evidence that's required, and I think that we need to redesign these green rules. I think we need a great deal of streamlining and simplification because the rules are too complex, too difficult to comply with, and they don't make it any easier for farms to deal with the risk issues that they have to face. I would like to know what you intend to do about trying to make the CAP more sustainable, whilst at the same time developing our agriculture. There are proposals emerging from the structured dialogue which suggest support on the basis of the size of a farm. But is this really going to lead to a fairly distributed CAP resource? Thank you.
Thank you for your follow-up question. I believe on the complexity, we all agree we need to work together to reduce administrative burden. And this is, as I said, it is a horizontal priority of the next European Commission. Also, what I would like to mention is that the last reform came in quite late because of European elections, amongst others, and that has also contributed to a delay of the deployment of that. So our national authorities were really rushed into this, and that means that in the end, maybe not everything was so clear and so simple as it could be by design. That is as well, I think, for political reasons, but I think we have done already a great deal with the simplification package of March. Also, as I said to Herbert Dorfmann, we should try to use more lump sums, which would then reduce there as well the administrative burden, and we have to be less strict on the small farmers, which represent the majority of our farmers. I think there can be done more to help them.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we see our Carlo Fidanza, please.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, welcome. Good evening. Sir, you, in your introductory remarks, spoke of fair trade, and rightly so. It was underestimated in the strategic dialogue, and so I'm pleased that you mentioned it here. It will be a fundamental chapter in these 5 years. We need to renew the level playing field to make sure that, and we know that our farmers and producers have to have extremely stringent rules, so they should be as close as possible to those that are imposed on producers that come from outside of the EU. So how do you plan to develop this policy along with the Trade Commissioner to make sure that the standards are the same for all and make sure that this is a focal point in the incoming and new trade agreements where there will be negotiations where we saw that farming has been penalized over the course of recent years?
Thank you, Mr. Fidanza. I definitely need to learn Italian, I think, with all the coordinators speaking Italian. On your question on trade, of course, this is a very relevant topic because, as I said, our farmers often feel a disadvantage because methods that are not allowed anymore in the European Union are allowed in third countries. So there is a competitive disadvantage, and this has been very clearly. So we need to work on reciprocity. A general remark, maybe often the problem is like, for example, Mercosur, the mandate to negotiate is over 20 years old. And in the meanwhile, much legislation has been done in the European Union, so this was not taken into account. That is why, as well, this additional protocol is now being negotiated. I think we have some examples already now of kind of mirror clauses. The deforestation regulation, I know that many people say it is burdensome for us, but in fact we are imposing what we already have as law in the European Union to other third countries. We have as well banned the neonicotinoids like clothianidin or thiamethoxam for sugar beets in the European Union. And now we have as well banned imports treated with those products. But this is now going to be taken or is taken to the court by a third country producer. So I believe we are WTO compatible what we are doing there, but I think we need to do even more, as you suggested, to have as well a proper reciprocity of production methods there. And I think those two, the deforestation and the neonics, are a good litmus test for that. We have as well now systematically in new trade agreements the so-called trade and sustainable development chapters that are getting ever more important. So really on the new agreements we have them in. And then also what we did, and therefore trade is important, we are protecting our geographical indications, which is a strong promotion argument as well for our European quality production.
Now it works. So I'd like to link up to the last sentence. Protection of our products should also go through fighting counterfeit and also promoting our quality foodstuffs. And we saw that there is a dangerous trend in the lowering of funds for promotion. And so would you commit to making sure that these funds are guaranteed and potentially even increased? I also noted that there was a recent trend to exclude from the use of some of these funds some products that are typical of European farm products, wine and red meat. There's constantly a request to reduce the promotion of or to not use promotion funds for that. So we would like you to commit to make sure that these promotion funds are guaranteed, potentially increased, and also maintained for red wine and red meat, which are a fundamental part of the European diet.
Thank you, Mr. Fidanza. Indeed, I have to say our GIs are of utmost importance, and therefore we need to better protect them, because my heart bleeds when I go to Latin America and you see in the supermarkets Parmigiano Reggiano, and just next to it is the queso tipo Parmigiano, which is 4 times cheaper, and it is in fact a counterfeit of our European production. So it is very important that we do agreements with third countries to protect this intellectual property and the high added value, because we are exporting. Last year we had in 2023 a record export year. We exported for 230 billion euros agriculture goods, and this was an all-time record. So it is really important that we are able to export and to promote. And you rightly mentioned that the budget for promotion had been suspended on some parts, and that was namely because of the midterm review of the MFF, where our heads of state and governments decided. So I'm still quite optimistic that we have to maintain, firstly, and secondly, there is an amending letter by the Commission, to the budget authority for an additional 40 million for the multi-country promotion, and that should already help in the short term.
Now, Renew and Elsi Katainen, please.
Kiitoksia puheenjohtaja, kiitos komissaari ehdokkaalle.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Commissioner-designate. It appears that the Commission is finally making agriculture and food an important part of our Commission and focusing on it as much as competitiveness. I think we need to ensure that we've got more funds coming from the MFF for agriculture. we need to ensure that farmers can be profitable and that the funding basis for the EU for agriculture is steady and that we do not see cuts made to the CAP budget. We've already seen significant changes made to the CAP in its revision 2 years ago, and we don't want to see any further changes or lack of certainty. My question to you is, what will you do to ensure that we do not have unfair competitiveness in our agri-food chain, and to make sure that our primary producers get a fair price for their products and that sustainability is taken into account?
Thank you very much, Mrs. Katainen, and I 100% can sign what you said, that agriculture is a strategic sector for the European Union, and we have to admit getting more dependent on agriculture products would be a disaster, because in so many other sectors we are already heavily dependent on imports. So let's keep things together, and we need agriculture not only in the most productive parts of the European Union, but as well in the most remote parts. We need a covering of farms all over the European Union, and I think the strong CAP has shown over the last 60 years that it can deliver. So I think we have to fight for the strong budget. Of course, this is not something I will or can do alone. Otherwise, you would know probably my answer. But nonetheless, I will strongly argue this as well on the basis of the political guidelines, as well on the basis of the strategic dialogues, where both are strongly asking for the strong agriculture budget that should be commensurate, and that would as well ensure that we can give the right incentives to farmers, because farmers would prefer to have incentives rather than regulation to contribute in our fight against climate change, to contribute against in the fight against biodiversity loss and pollinators loss. So those incentives need to be better done, and I think there is room for manoeuvre, for example, in the frame of the eco schemes that in some member states are working well, in others are not working so well yet. So we have to address this, and I think there as well we have to see what nationally can be done to better support and design those eco schemes to have this. But I think it is important, I think we have learned it from the crisis, from the farmers on the streets, that any budget cuts would be a disaster, especially in those tricky times where we face catastrophes like in Spain all over the continent. So this needs to be addressed. I'm already over my 2 minutes, so I still need the primary producers, but I think that will come back again, or in the update question.
Kiitoksia vastauksesta. Toivottavasti.
Thank you very much for your answer. I hope that we'll be able to continue these discussions, but I would also like to know specifically how we will be able to continue with the kind of thing you've been talking about. Food production is, of course, at the heart of the agricultural policy, but the bioeconomy sector is also very important. And so is there going to be new income provided for farmers so they can work in the bioeconomy sector? As Agri-Commissioner, how do you imagine you will be able to influence and make commitments for the enhancement of the bioeconomy strategy in the future, including legislation, so that farming and forestry can be seen as a solution for the transition? And I imagine you will cooperate with Commissioner Roswell to ensure that future legislative initiatives in the future recognise the differences between member states when it comes to forestry and provide the flexibility required.
Thank you for that follow-up question. And indeed, I believe, and I know it from practice, a lot of farmers are as well forest owners for their own necessities, but as well for an additional income. So I think agroforestry can work together, and bioeconomy is definitely a solution for the rural areas to get as well quality jobs in the rural areas. That is something very important. They need to not only produce biomass but be able as well to generate more added value. That will be very crucial. So I will be working very closely with my hopefully future colleague Jessica Roswell on this to develop together a bioeconomy. Some might say, what has agriculture to do with forestry? But I just wanted to remind you that already now there are a lot of programs going on where the CAP funds initiatives in the forestry sector, and this stands for over 4 billion euros. So it is not as if agriculture had nothing to do with forestry and the hopefully fruitful future bioeconomy.
Okay, thank you very much. And Greens, Thomas Weitz, please, Thomas.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner-designate Christophe Hansen, for being here today. Reflecting actually on the last question of Elsi Katainen and also your answers you have been giving, you have said, well, foresters and farmers witness the negative impacts of climate crisis and biodiversity loss every single day. And if you already see the kind of competition on the future budgets and the future MFFs, do you actually think that we will be able to maintain the amount of money that we have available for farming without teaming up with biodiversity and climate? And in link to that question, then how exactly are you prepared to actually help farmers to, just to give one example, to reduce the use of toxic pesticides? And to build on that, I mean, we're still losing 800 farms per day. This is just an enormous loss on farm holdings that we witness ongoingly. Will you be ready to think about strategies of keeping these farmers on the land, like through capping and redistribution of parts of the funds, or changing actually the funding model from hectare-based payments, at least partly to workplace or income-based payments? Would this be something that you will engage with? Because we have to stop this loss of farms for the first round, yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weitz. And I believe if we already would manage to maintain the budget as it stands, I would be very glad if we manage at the same time as well to get additional incomes. Bioeconomy can contribute, get an additional income. I'm also thinking about carbon farming, for example, where the foresters and the farmers could be rewarded for certain practices, and that would be as well an additional income. So this is something where definitely we need to work, but as well the position, I mentioned it earlier already, of the farmers in the entire supply chain needs to be strengthened, that they are cooperatives that can work together and that they have as well a bargaining power and that they are not just the employees of some bigger company. That is for me very important. And on the reduction of toxic pesticides, I think all the farmers would like to reduce pesticides because firstly they have to drive out with their tractor. That costs already energy prices. That is they have to work labor costs as well, and as well they know that they are not doing good to species like bees and other plants or animals. So I think this is something where we need to help them as well. When we take pesticides off the market, we need as well to be able to deliver faster alternatives to that, because if the farmer loses his crop because in the beet sector, for example, because he can't treat with neonics anymore, well, then he needs an alternative. So I really want to speed up this together with the responsible colleagues, the authorization procedure for biocontrol for alternatives. That would be very important. And then maybe another point is organic farming is a way forward. It is meanwhile in all the national strategic plans we have a strategy, but I think some member states need a little bit more push. And then the last question on the redistribution, I think we discussed this already during the last reform. We did a little bit of redistribution. It was the 10%, which brings then a little bit more for the small farmers, but it is not enough. And I think the strategic dialogue is hinting at a more distributive measure in that sense.
I have a strong voice. I can do without mic, but then we have good translation. that will not like me. So just to recall, hectare-based payments versus income-based, maybe for a second round, but basically also, I mean, the diversity of our agriculture is providing us not just with vital rural areas, but also with resilience towards climate impacts, but also with resilience towards market distortions. Will you be ready to strengthen direct marketing schemes? So directly consumers, producers, but also producers directly to tourism, to public procurement, to have alternatives and build alternatives for farmers actually to sell their goods also via different streams than via retailers or big food processors. Is this something we can expect from you?
On the hectare-based payments, of course, we have to see what is the benefit for the environment, because one of your colleagues whom I met says as well that in his region you have organic farms that are over 1,000 hectares big, and I think the benefit is as well on those hectares for environment good. So to be too strict on that might be a problem, but I would not move from a certain redistributive measure away. We tried this last time. Commission and Parliament agreed, but the Council was back in time quite reluctant on that part. But I think this needs to be done to get small farmers more resilient, and then alternative incomes. I know it from practice in Luxembourg, where I go to buy my meat. For example, it's a small farmer. He has then his freezer on the ground. I can do it by internet, and then I go and get my meat there, and as well the fruit and vegetables. But it is very burdensome as well with the national authorities to get there, and I think we need to encourage as well our national authority to be a little bit more flexible there and help them really to deploy this marketing on farm.
Thank you. And Luke Flanagan from the left.
Thank you very much, Commissioner-designate. I don't come from a farming background. I live in a rural area. And I have to say, I am a massive fan of the Common Agricultural Policy, because without it, my family would have had to emigrate again. And it's on that. And the reason why I'm asking you this question about funding is because I believe the more funding we have for CAP, the more money we have for rural areas. The EU budget for agriculture has gone down from 65.5% to 23.5% of the budget. In Ireland, in real terms, we have seen a 60% drop in CAP funding since 1991. You spoke about various other sources for funding, EIB, we currently have Next Generation EU. I have to say I'm not a fan of that. I am a fan of us actually using money that we don't have to borrow and spreading it around rural areas. How ambitious will you be as the Commissioner, if you get the job, in increasing the real budget, not borrowed money, into the future? How ambitious will you be? Will you be as ambitious as we were back in 1991?
Thank you for that question. Of course, it is premature to prejudge what will the next college decide, but you can count on me to defend a very strong and dedicated budget to the common agriculture policy, to concrete figures. You agree, I don't have the glass ball to reply this in detail, but as well we need to make pressure as well on our national governments if we want a strong CAP that is not amputated from several parts. Then we need to contribute as well more, because the money is not coming dropping down like rain. So I think that it will be very important. Therefore, I look really at the money where it lies, and I mentioned it in the beginning. For example, Just Transition Fund. There's so much money left of funds that is not used. We need to guarantee that the access of our farmers get there, because usually it's bigger companies, bigger projects that needs to change. And therefore, I think we are really as well at the national level, really it is important to steer our farmers into those funds. That would be very crucial. EIB as well, I believe it is important when we speak about generational renewal. I think they have the capacities for investment securization, and that is something we haven't looked into so far. So So this will be really one of my first steps where I don't have to wait for the heads of state and governments, where I don't have to wait for the discussions on the next MFF yet, to take the money now, because farmers don't have the time to wait until we agree here on an hopefully enhanced budget, which I cannot promise, and you know exactly that I can't. So that's why I really want to do in the short term, because we need to give perspectives, we need to give predictability, and there are means out there that are underused currently.
Thank you. Several members have touched on, and you have as well, on the idea of giving more funding to small-scale and medium-scale farmers. It was mentioned by you that there was something in the current cap, it's called CRIS, the Complementary Redistribution Income Support, which is set at a minimum of 10%. And I hear various MEPs from various countries saying we need more money for small farmers. I hear various governments say the same thing. Yet when you look at each and every one of these countries' CAP strategic national plans, we see that the vast majority of them do not go past a minimum of 10% for small farmers. In fact, I think it's only 6 out of all EU countries. Half of Belgium does a really good job at it, and some other countries do a good job on it. So when you hear people complain that there isn't enough money for small-scale farmers, you yourself said you'd like to see more money going to them. What would you do with this mechanism in a reformed CAP? Would you make it mandatory that countries have to give more than 10%, given that you support more money going to them, but countries are refusing to do it?
You remember well the last negotiations we had on the current CAP. You were in charge in the Agriculture Committee for your group. I was in charge in the Environmental Committee, and we had the discussion on the mandatory aspect. And I think the mandatory aspect needs to be put on the table again. The situation politically has as well changed, because the pressure from our farming community is very high. So I really believe that we need a certain degressivity, because when you read in articles that then recently, I think Thomas Weitz was quoted in that as well in The Guardian, on billionaires getting billions literally of public money, of taxpayers' money, that is not the CAP I want to stand for, and I want to look into that, how we can really distribute better degressivity very clearly, but we need as well to see that one size doesn't fit all. So this we really need to look as well at the definition of agri-farmers, which is not the same in all the member states. So the criteria is very different there. So, but I think we really have need to take a closer look, because with me and for me, it is unacceptable that billionaires get this, and those more in need get maybe €100 more in a year, but this is not going to be make them profitable in the end.
Okay, Ivan David is the last coordinator for ESN. Thank you very much, Commissioner-designate President. In 2004, several new member states joined the EU after having to comply with a number of conditions, for instance, cutting down the production of several commodities. And then they were given lower support than the previous member states of the EU. They were promised that this would be compensated until 2012, but it in fact has never been compensated. Do you think that's all right? Are you going to do anything to remedy this? Now, when it comes to national subsidies, the difference is even broader, which obviously leads to imports into poorer countries at dumping prices. Will you insist on meeting all Green Deal objectives, or will you try to change some of them in order to make sure that we have fewer problems in our agriculture? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. David. Your first question goes precisely on convergence. We discussed now the internal convergence with Mr. Flanagan, but this concerns the external convergence. And we know that there is still differences and huge differences between member states depending on the moment they joined the European Union. So this is, of course, a topic that will be very high on the agenda as well of not only the next MFF discussion, but as well in the discussion we will have to have on the reform of the common agriculture policy. But of course, there we have to work towards convergence from one day to another. It is probably not that easy, but nonetheless, I think convergence as well, the external convergence, is a critical point, not only from budget-wise, but as well from a social point of view that we need to meet. Then on your second question on meeting the Green Deal objectives, I believe that on the basis, the Green Deal objectives, nobody is or can honestly put them in question. We see the dramatic events that we have had now in Spain. We had dramatic events before in France, in Central Europe. Those critical events are getting ever and ever more frequent, and we need to better prepare and mitigate where we can. And there, the farming sector can and wants to contribute. And all the farmers I speak about, they say, we want to contribute, but make it simpler to contribute. And I think that is something that we need to work on, rather to say, okay, I withdraw this or I withdraw that now, just to set a signal. We have good elements in place. We need that farmers are able to take them up. We need to support, and this as well financially, their capacity to buy into this new innovation. That will be crucial, and not revising everything that is going into the right direction.
Thank you very much. And now, oh sorry. Yes, Mr.
Pane kandidáte, já bych se rád zeptal, co...
Okay, in that case, multinational chains that are basically running the market with food and other commodities are determining purchasing prices that are often below the cost of production. And then, on the other hand, consumer prices have been growing steeply, even by 30% over the past few years. What are you going to do about that?
Thank you for that question. I think it has been partly already answered to different questions before, when it came to the targeted CMO review, where we should strengthen the position of the farmers in the supply chain. This is as well an overarching objective of my mission letter and the vision I will present in the first 100 days. Therefore, we will need to make a targeted amendment and revision of the Common Markets Organization to address and strengthen the position of the producer organizations in there. And then also the Unfair Trading Practices Directive is in place only since barely 1 year, but it is as well already delivering. So this is very important to acknowledge, but there is an issue in cross-border enforcement, and that is a quick fix that we can address in the next weeks after the next commission hopefully can take up its duties.
Thank you, and we will start with the second round now, question and answer with members. So first, I would like to ask Mr. Buda, please.
Doamnă președinte, mulțumesc.
Thank you, Chair. First and foremost, best of luck, Commissioner-designate, because your success is our success, and I think the farmers' success as well. And I'd like to ask you, and I'd like to insist on aspects related to external convergence of direct payments, and namely that subsidies for farmers in Eastern Europe and Western Europe should be equal. This is a major concern in the agricultural sector. In fact, there are differences when it comes to direct payments, even within member states. Farmers have more or less the same production costs. They're on the same market, but they receive these unequal payments, which leads to unfair competition among themselves. What is the timeline you envisage? Because I understand your constraints, but farmers are waiting for a reply. When do you think this full convergence will be reached between member states? Also, when it comes to the future of direct payments, because this is a seatbelt for farmers, will they be conditioned only on environmental issues exclusively? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buda, and I will start by the second part of your question on the budget. And there I would like to remind again the political guidelines by our President, who clearly states that she will defend and that we will defend as European Commission an income policy for farmers. An income policy doesn't mean just environmental services. So this is very clear. I believe the size and the shape of the future MFF, of course, still needs to be decided. That will be by the end of next year. So it is difficult to foresee this already. But I think it is important to remind people as well that already now 1/3 of the EU budget is used for agri-environmental measures, if it is cross-compliance or eco-scheme. So I think it is very important to remind that as well. And as well, the European Court of Auditors in a recent report clearly stated as well that the green architecture of the CAP and the strategic plans is working and up for the task, is going into the right objectives, is going into the right direction. So this is very important to recognize as well. And then on the second part of your question on the external convergence, you know that we had already at the last mandate this very strong fight. This will be as well at the center of the MFF discussions, because we know how member states deal with it, and nobody wants to lose. But if you have convergence, somebody has to lose, otherwise the other part can't win. So this will be a trade-off to be made, but I think we have to go as well a little bit further and think about the next steps, because we are speaking as well about further enlargements of the European Union. So we need to future-proof our common agriculture policy, as well the income policy that we have in there. And this needs to be sustained not just for the next 2-3 years, but further on. And therefore, I think a thorough assessment of how we did it back in time when Central European countries joined the European Union, but as well the next step, because as well there we will have similar discussions.
Now, Christine Maestre, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Commissioner. Thank you very much indeed for your words of support to our country in the wake of the terrible events there. Of course, we are going to need support from the EU, so we very much appreciate that. I'd also like to ask you directly, in the light of what you've been saying, what specific recommendations you'll be putting forward on climate change so that we can tackle that and mitigate the impact inter alia on agriculture. I'd also like to ask you about a separate issue, which is the mirror clauses and reciprocity. I'd like to know exactly what your thinking is there. Are you going to be thinking in terms of the WTO framework and from the international trade perspective, or are you intending to take a wider view? Obviously, there are constraints within which we need to operate at the moment, and there will also probably be changes to the WTO. But against that unknown background, we need to know what we can say to farmers about mirror clauses and the impacts. We also need to make sure that all these policies apply on a uniform basis across the whole sector of agriculture. I would also like you to tell us a bit more about your strategic vision of the CAP. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Many questions in one question, so I will try to reply to all of them. Of course, I believe the dramatic events we have lived in Spain need to show us as well that we need better preparedness. And better preparedness is not just in the agriculture sector, it will be a cross-cutting priority to be better prepared to extreme situations. And by better preparation, I don't just mean financial compensation, but as well we need to prepare that those events come often, and we need as well to see how the rescue is organized in such situations, and how as well the first deliverables of the European Union and neighboring countries can be better targeted in all the situations we have lived currently. So I think there is a lot to be done. And then on the cost side, we have the agriculture reserve that is as well in this case going to be helpful, but it is by far not sufficient. The agriculture reserve is 450 million euros a year. We had already floods in Central Europe. We had floods in France. We had forest fires in Portugal. So for 2025, it is already almost used. So that is a huge problem. And I think on this reserve, we really need to do better, not only for natural disasters, but as well for animal diseases, for example, and from perturbations from the market that can be caused by imports from third countries. And there you were arguing on the mirror clauses, and I said we have them already for some products in place, the neonicotinoids, for example, but this is contested, legally contested, so we have now to see. I'm quite confident that we will win this fight, because it is in the interest of our own health. So we can argue this at the WTO. It is the so-called green box in there. So I think we have to explore what are other elements that we would need to have those more effective. And as well, we need to work on our border controls, where mainly member states are as well in charge to better control what is coming in and what the quality is.
Now, Madam Crespo-Diaz.
Gracias.
Carmen,
Muchas gracias. Gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hansen. Dana has assaulted my country, Spain, Castilla de la Mancha, Valencia, Andalusia, and my thoughts go with all of the families that are affected. Now, the farmers in their tractors were the first that were there in Valencia, and they assisted the families. We need to have a clear thought about whether or not we are going to look at regulation or the reestablishment of those digs that would be so important for them. Now, we know that the crisis reserve is also a possibility for these farmers. The farmers that have made clear requests in their protests. They want to fight unfair competition, and they want support from the union. And therefore, I would like to hear from you, sir, what precisely will you be prepared to do when it comes to making sure that mirror clauses are included in agreements with third countries? I think it is excellent news that you have said that here tonight. Excellent news for our farmers. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Crespo, for your question. And I indeed believe EU solidarity will and is key at this very moment. We have as well, we have seen it in the satellite mapping, where the EU is helping as well. Here you have mentioned the European Solidarity Fund. We have as well cohesion funds, where flexibilities are now possible. And this has been agreed on the 21st of October, so very recently. We have also the recovery and resilience facility. And of course, we have inside our strategic plans the possibility to restore production potential. And I think those tools need to be used here appropriately. We have as well, in the frame of the rural development, now agreed that the member states can provide additional funds up to 42,000 euros in the case of natural disasters, and of course the agri-reserve. But I think as well, when we speak about the geopolitical and environmental challenges that we are living, that we need to work on a stronger instrument there as well. On the unfair trading practices and different standards, this is of course as well sometimes difficult to explain to our partners, because we are changing our laws sometimes very quickly, and then we expect immediately that the other side accepts this from one moment to another. That is, of course, goes through phasing in, but as well, as I said, we have to, when we agree when we do agreements, when we negotiate, this needs to go much further, faster, because otherwise everything was in the mandate is not up to date one at the moment of signature. We have seen it with Mercosur. We needed this additional one, this additional protocol, but I think the trade and sustainability chapters from the new generation of trade agreements are very much going into that direction, and I will look in further products that are prohibited in the European Union to set them on the list of non-imports.
Now, I would like to ask colleague Penele from Patriots. Oh, yeah, you are here. Okay.
Madame la Présidente,
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. A few months ago, everywhere in Europe, farmers said no to free trade. Now, apparently they were ignored because it seems that far from this House, there have been negotiations with Mercosur for one of the biggest free trade agreements in history. Commissioner, you need to be aware of the fact that our farmers, our livestock holders don't want the Mercosur agreement. They don't want unfair competition. They don't want to have products being imported that do not respect our standards. We do not want European agriculture to be sacrificed so that more German cars can be sold. Even if we've got mirror clauses in place, they just don't want it. This treaty with Mercosur is very critical. And so I ask you a question, because in just a few days, the Mercosur agreement is going to be agreed. And so it's important for you to address this. Thank you very much, Mr. Penele, for this very important question. I'd also like to remind you that the EU also exports a lot of agricultural products, and I highlighted the amount, 230 billion euros worth of agri-food exports just last year. And this is a huge bonus for our European farmers. Now, obviously, you are free to do whatever you would like about Mercosur, but I'm not able to vote on it. It's you that can vote on it within this House. But I think it's important that we do recognise when we're looking at an agreement, whether it be Mercosur or a different one, for example, with China on protection of PGIs, it's in the interest of our farmers that they do get this kind of agreement, and we have to recognise that. I touched upon this when I spoke to Mr. Fidanza before, when we were talking about Parmesan. They want to buy our food products, but at the moment they're currently too expensive, and so they get an agreement. But you're quite right, however, that there are some sectors that are feeling exposed, for example, particularly our red meat producers. But at the moment, we are importing 200,000 tons of red meat from Mercosur countries. They're coming into our market without an agreement. Now, I don't know if the negotiations are going to be fruitful in that area or not, but this meat is already on our market. And where we need to be careful is that we need to ensure that these products do meet our standards. We've had the Brazilian case, for example, already with hormones in the meat. And so we need to ensure that our controls are effective as well, and that these kind of products aren't coming into the EU because they do not meet EU legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleague Waldemar Buda, please.
Szanowni panie kandydacie.
Mr. Candidate, I would like to ask about Mercosur. The previous speakers have already talked about it. I don't think that clauses will give us a chance to compete. Everything will be fine on paper, but in the end, the Commission will have no tools to control whether the requirements are fulfilled. And I'm expecting you, if you become Commissioner, I expect you to get out of the role of someone who represents Luxembourg, one country, but be someone who represents a huge field, which is agriculture, 1/3 of the Union. You have to be a very strong commissioner who will be very strong in discussions with other parties. In the case of Mercosur, it is harmful to our agriculture, and you have to be very strong. We will be supporting you. You say that the multi-annual financial framework is not decided yet. However, from our point of view, at least the level that is now has to be guaranteed. So please fight for it.
Thank you very much for those two questions as well. Again, on the Mercosur, I think it is, we have to make sure in all trade agreements in general that products that are as well produced in the European Union respect a certain level of similarity, so reciprocity will be key, and that is something we have to further strengthen. I think I have been quite clear on that very clearly. On the other hand, we need as well a certain agri input, and there we come, for example, when we feed our animals, 25% of the proteins that we are currently using to feed our animals are coming from third countries, where we have very little impact on the quality of that, and we are highly dependent. And when I say dependent, I say as well that we are vulnerable. So the livestock sector is at risk as well if we have not the stability there. So we definitely need to work on more autonomy when it comes to the production of such protein crops as well in the European Union. And there we need to look as well at how we can finance them. That will be important as well to have a sustainable livestock sector for the future. And that will be part as well of the future vision on the future of agriculture and food. And then also, I think what is very important that we do our negotiations at WTO level. There I will be as well present. It will be as well at the level of Codex Alimentarius, where we need to put products on the lists that are not fit for our market, and we have to do that on a scientific basis, and you can count on me. The same way you can count on me is that I will defend a strong and dedicated budget for our agriculture sector and for the broader rural areas. That is very important. That has done its proof over the last 60 years, and we need to stand very strong. That will not be only me deciding, that will be you deciding as well, the member states, and we have to make our point and fight this fight together.
Madame Christine Singer.
Vielen Dank, Frau Vorsitzende.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Hansen, a lot of points have already been discussed today. And as a voice for agricultural practice here, of course, forestry is a very important point as well. We have had a lot of initiatives from the Commission about forestry in recent years without there being a lot of care for the climate policy at the same time. I think when we're talking about structured dialogue, I think we should have structured dialogue on forestry as well, particularly looking at the future of agriculture and forestry, looking at subsidiarity. Is this dialogue something which you will start together with your colleagues, looking at how we can strengthen people who work with our natural resources and support them? And how do you believe we're going to be able to, in the future, see forestry as economically valuable? Forestry, of course, is a balance between protecting climate interests and protecting the income of people who work in forestry and who work in a sustainable industry. And this is something which your policy would need to reflect. Thank you very much. Well, I think we'd have to update my portfolio title and add forestry to it here. But you're absolutely right that forestry does need to be supported. This is something which I spoke about when I responded to Ms. Katainen. A lot of farmers also own woodland. And often they do use the woodland for forestry or for other purposes. In any case, it is often a source of income. And so this is something which we need to bear in mind, particularly when we're looking at the circular economy and when we're talking about carbon storage. Because here there are a lot of areas where woodland can be productive and should remain productive. And it's also very important when we're looking at its contribution to the bioeconomy. I certainly am very much willing to strengthen this dialogue. The Commission regularly does have exchanges on this, but obviously more can always be done. I don't think it is just up to me. It's not my responsibility here. Of course, forestry is in the hands of the member states. But, of course, as I said before, in the Common Agricultural Policy, we've got 180 forestry policies that are worth €4.2 billion. And so it obviously is very important for us to have a similar dialogue for that area. We don't need to copy it, but if we do want a properly functioning bioeconomy, then forestry needs to be involved in that. And hopefully I will be able to carry this out with hopefully my future colleague, Ms. Rosval, and we'll be able to find a solution to this, and I'd like to work with you on that. Thank you.
Now, Stefano Bonaccini, please.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner-designate, the new regulation on geographical indications is moving us into a decisive phase for the PDOs and IGPs. We need to have consistent support to this European success story that is generating value without any specific fund. And it's doping growth in entire regions like Emilia-Romagna that I had the honor of guiding for 10 years. It's the top European region in terms of BGIs. It has 44, some 40 billion euros. Commissioner-designate, to continue to enhance the excellence of our agri-food sector and in our regions, are you ready to put into place a European action plan for the development of geographical indications, one that has sufficient funds and that would have an awareness-based food approach for young people and for third markets? Because it are these third markets, these third countries that need to have specific attention paid to them. In the INTA committee, you saw that, I'm sure. We need to make sure that they are not the target of unjustified tariffs and retaliation on the trade market. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. I think we had already touched a little bit on the GIs, and indeed we have 3,600 registered GIs in the European Union that firstly protect our intellectual property, but as well, as you mentioned rightly, it is our export, let's say, logo that is really helping to get our products and their identity on the ground. That is very important, and we have as well, because those products usually have a higher added value as, let's say, a standard non-transformed product. So I think it is really important that we continue it, and of course, we have the GI review is very recent that we have to acknowledge, and the secondary legislation to that is only coming now. It has been presented now, I think last week or 2 weeks ago. So we have now 2 months of scrutiny here, and then in January it will enter into force. So I think it is would be good to have such a GI development of a GI roadmap. That would be a good initiative, and that we could take a form of an action plan. I think we have as well to make an outreach exercise, because, as I said earlier, some member states are doing good, others are not yet there. So this could bring even more for the entire agriculture sector. And I think we have as well, we can do this as well for the action plan, maybe not immediately now or next year, because the legislation is recent, but in 2026 that could be something we could do. But this needs as well then to go together with the promotion programs that Mr. Fidanza asked for as well. This is very important to have as well our European road shows together with the member states to promote because what we are promoting is the sustainability. If it is now wine or if it is meat or other products or cheese, it is as well the way we produce. That is our logo and our brand, and that we have to promote better, and the GIs are the perfect instrument for that.
So now, colleague Becker, please, floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, dear Commissioner-designated, dear colleague, as member of the Parliament already, and this is not irrelevant. It's significant, and it's also hopefully a good idea for the future in the relations between the Commission and this Parliament. I have a question about the next enlargement of the European Union, because this enlargement would undoubtedly change the conditions of competition in the internal market, as Ukraine's accession to the EU would involve globally competitive agriculture producers with large-scale productions. The difference in the scale of production and farm structures are significant. The impact on global markets resulting from the war in Ukraine was a clear evidence of that. Therefore, we need to start appropriate preparations of the European agri-food sector. My question is very clear. How will you ensure the European farmers do not suffer because of the possible future enlargement of the European Union? I look forward to your answer. Thank you, and I wish you good luck.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bick. And indeed, enlargement is in all the discussions I had so far a very prominent subject, because farmers are concerned. We, of course, need to support, and I think always the elephant in the room is Ukraine, because it has the biggest agriculture potential. I think it equals 1/3 of the European production. So it is really a gigantic production machine, a powerhouse of agriculture that might be joining the European Union. So this needs to be properly prepared. And I think that is very clear, because the solidarity that we currently have towards Ukraine is not something we should take for granted. We need that our farmers and our rural areas continue to support this. And this then, of course, needs to be as well bearable. And we don't need to make losses to our farming sector because of another country or other countries joining. I think that is very clear. But we have already had the experience in the past. I'm coming from a farm, and I remember that my brother in 2004 was really upset when several new member states joined the European Union, because he was as well fearing for the prices of his crops. Was it now true or not true in the end? I will not judge that, but in the end we had found solutions. Those solutions are solutions of not, let's say, penetrating the internal market from one day to another. This needs to be gradual, and already now we have a very close relation with the autonomous trade measures, where we take several products in. For 5 of them, we have already the safeguards. We needed to use them, not yet for maize and for chicken, but we have to see. So we really need to see as well now, when we have already the access to the market, that there is as well already gradual adaptation and, let's say, joining the standards of production that we have in the European Union. That will be very crucial. So I think this, let's say, getting closer together needs to be accompanied by aligning as well production standards. That will help, but of course we need as well to see at the financial side, enlargement will cost in the end, but will maybe allow us as well to be more independent on protein crops. We have to see that and discuss with the Ukrainian side. That will be one huge task, not only for me to discuss with the Ukrainian side, but I think in general, enlargement needs to be properly prepared.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to Anna Strollenberg.
Thank you, Commissioner-designate HANSEN. Let's talk about something different, plant-based proteins. Because science shows that the need for plant-based food production and consumption is important. The FAO, the WHO, and IPCC stress the importance of the shift to achieve a healthy and sustainable food system. The strategic dialogue also concludes with a societal consensus on this topic. So science and society are clear, so now the EU must take action. Protein diversification is also a strategic importance for the EU. As you also mentioned, And the report of the Joint Research Centre also shows that the EU is very strongly dependent on feed imports to sustain our intensive livestock system. So reducing this dependency is necessary to preserve our food security and, not important, it can boost our competitiveness. So what do? We rebalance our diets, we produce more plant-based proteins in Europe, and we support extensive and circular livestock systems. My question would be, will you bring forward an action plan for plant-based foods as proposed in the strategic dialogue? Will this action plan include elements to tackle both consumption and production? And lastly, will you commit to policy actions to reduce our dependency on imported feed?
Thank you very much. I read very intensively the strategic dialogue report as well. I had a little bit a different lecture than yours, but I will not go into the details of that. I think it was very tricky to say and impose top-down who has to eat what. And that is something we really and I want to avoid, because that is not how the European Union should work. As well, meat products have as well, and that is recognized as well. They are part in a balanced diet. Of course, everything we consume needs to be consumed in moderation. My doctor told me as well to eat less red meat. That was a medical advice to me, but I think it would be very dangerous to impose this top-down. That would even make us more let's say, far away from citizens. But what I completely agree with you, we are heavily underproducing plant-based proteins in the European Union, and they have, I would say, at least two benefits. One of them being that they are beneficial as well for the climate, because they store as well emissions and are in that sense already very important. Secondly, we are heavily dependent on their imports. 25% of our animals need to be fed with proteins coming from outside. This dependency is to be brought down, and I think it will be very important that we update as well the plant protein needs. And we have a strategy dated from 2018, if I'm not mistaken. I think we need to update that definitely, and I think this has been asked as well by several resolutions from this House. So I will include this as well in the sustainable livestock strategy that will be part of my vision related to the proteins as well. But I think it is very important that we see as well into other opportunities. I mentioned Ukraine. We have to maybe steer as well and negotiate with them that they produce part of that what we would need to import. But as well, I think this will be a task for the follow-up of the strategic dialogue, the so-called European Board on Agriculture and Food, to discuss this question in detail, because in the report it was rather a vague formulation, and that needs to be discussed more in detail.
Thank you. And now, Céline Imart, the floor is yours.
Commissaire désigné, l'agriculture européenne est à la...
Thank you, Commissioner-designate. We are at a crossroads, and we need to address the whole question of access to water and climate mitigation, risk management and the threats to agriculture and farmers the continent over. We need to improve our water management, have a more resilient approach so that our agriculture can respond to the challenges in the area of energy and food security, because there are too many threats in a number of different directions. We've got plenty of extremists in France, eco-extremists, who are up in arms at what is going on. So we need to find solutions. We need to recognize that water is vital for farming, for protecting biodiversity, for fighting fires, but we need to be able to manage it when there is heavy rain. We need to be able to store it. So what sort of strategy do you envisage? How do you intend to put in place an ambitious strategy so that we can leverage the necessary investment to deal with the quantities of water as and when we need to manage them? Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for that question, Ms. Imar. I think it's an extremely topical point, of course. I've been to a number of regions and talked to many colleagues, including a Swedish one, who have said that in the same year they've had problems of drought, of floods and forest fires. And this in Sweden, and I really would not myself have thought that this sort of thing would be happening in Sweden, but I think that this is very significant, and it's something I'll be taking up with my Swedish colleague, or prospective colleague, I hope. So it's not a question of it just being some areas of the EU which are affected. It's the entirety of our continent and the whole of the EU. And we're finding these climate disasters afflicting areas where we would not have anticipated them at all. Therefore, that is an observation which we are all made, and we therefore have to realize the corollary is that we need to have a strategic approach. Some 20% of our farm land is already subject to water protection schemes. This is to protect against flooding and to enhance water quality. But you're absolutely right, we need to have an overarching strategy. Commissioner von der Leyen has asked me to feed into the whole strategy on water resilience and to do so together with my prospective Swedish colleague. And I think that this is extremely important. We need to be protecting the interests of the citizens, of farmers and the environment at one and the same time. So we've already done quite a lot in terms of prevention in the current CAP. We've got protection for water areas and for peatlands and for wetlands, but we do need to do a great deal more, and the infrastructure is going to be vital. We're going to have to be able to protect areas from floods when there's too much water. We're going to have to try to provide water in cases of droughts. We've got all kinds of infrastructure which needs to be not only maintained but also improved, dikes and water retention facilities that are not fit for purpose. Thank you.
Arash Saidi, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Chair. Commissioner-designate, you have spoken about objectives helping young people to join farming and moving towards sustainable farming. At the same time, however, we're just about to sign a new trade agreement with Mercosur, and so there will be a lot of pressure looking at, particularly at environmental and social measures. It is clear, I think, that free trade agreements, such as that with Mercosur, are very much to the detriment of European farmers, and we're seeing extreme social dumping, which the sector will not survive. What do you imagine you're going to be able to do to protect our farmers, to prevent this dumping, and to ensure that we can protect their income rather than having them always be the loser in this kind of major free trade agreement that your predecessors are currently negotiating? Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Saidi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Saidi, for that question. It echoes what a lot of your colleagues have said, and it is a very important point. International trade provides an opportunity for our farmers and for our agri-food sector. 230 billion euros of exports last year, and a 70 billion euro excess in terms of our import-export balance. So that's something which we very clearly need to also take into account, because we do have a broader agri and agri-food sector which does benefit from international agreements. Obviously, there are sectors which are very exposed, particularly because their margins are already very tight and they are products where the exports are cheaper. So these are areas where we very clearly need to look at what is being negotiated, and what's currently being negotiated is the additional protocol to Mercosur. Now, I haven't yet seen that. Perhaps you have, but I haven't yet. We need to analyse it in detail, and that is the job of this European Parliament, and also to ensure that the necessary arguments are put forward for its ratification or not. I think we've got opportunities, but we've also got challenges, and we need to find the right balance. What I can tell you is that I'm going to do everything I can, for example, on neonicotinoids, where we're looking at other products which aren't permitted for use within the EU, which make farming more expensive, we need to ensure that we get a certain amount of reciprocity there. But obviously, we need to look at the entire agri-food chain. It starts with the farmer, but it ends with the consumer, because the consumer also needs to be willing to pay. And that's often where we end up with problems. But I think this is something which is covered by the treaties. We need to produce a product which at the end of the day is acceptable to the end consumer. And this is what I was saying before about CMOs, the adaptation for producer organizations, and unfair commercial practices. This is something which we're going to do right now, which will help our farmers.
Maria Grappini.
Domnule comisar-desemnat.
Commissioner-designate, we've talked about a situation of the CAP after 2027 and possible enlargement. Now, let's talk about the future of direct payments. And now about products coming from Ukraine. We need to regulate this in order to avoid destabilizing markets. And, my country has been affected, and it's not the only one. Do you believe that the protection measures from June last year are enough? And what do you think about renegotiating the free trade agreement with Ukraine? And since we're talking about crisis, Commissioner-designate, will you put in place an additional instrument for crisis management and boost the agricultural reserve package? Because we've had problems with successive crises. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Grappini, for this question that is as well complementary to other questions on Ukraine that have already been asked. So I think we have to consider that the autonomous trade measures that are in place are there to help Ukraine. It is a kind of their lifeline in the current war. So it is important that we have them. But we have seen, and I think that was as well part in some countries, that farmers went to the streets because products that were not destined for the markets entered or leaked into the market. And that is a problem that we need to address. I think now the autonomous trade measures, we have as well the safeguards for 7 sensitive products, and this is already activated. I mentioned it for 5 products, except for maize and for poultry. And this autonomous trade measures will expire next year in June. So I believe the best solution would firstly to learn what went well, what went wrong with the autonomous trade measures that we had, and let them flow into the negotiations on the deep and comprehensive free trade agreement that we have with the Ukraine, and that needs to be updated. I think those lessons learned need to be flowing in, and this is as well, in my opinion, already a certain preparation for a future enlargement. The future enlargement will not be in 1 or 2 years. I think we all agree on that. First, the war needs to be over, and then the alignment procedures need to take place. The different chapters where the Ukraine for the adhesion needs to comply, we will not make exceptions there. I think it is very important that the same quality we produce comes as well in and will enter the internal market. So the internal market problematic will be at the heart, of course, of these negotiations. And I think we have to remind that. I think we need as well, when we talk about, and I said it earlier as well, we need a gradual adaptation of production standards as well. So we have as well on the standards, the level playing field, and the rest will follow. But I think we will have a lot of discussions on that, but we need to make it work for our farming sector. And I know that yours in particular and several others, neighboring countries, are very concerned by this.
Děkuji a nyní pan kolega Tomáš.
Thank you, Mr. Kubin, please. The Commissioner-designate, because you are to be Commissioner for Agriculture and Food, I have 2 short questions, one from each of your areas, and I'd put more emphasis on the first area, and that is targeting the CAP support. According to your nomination letter, you should ensure that support is targeted at those who need it most. How will you approach this evaluation? Based on what criteria? Will you mainly take into account the productive nature of agriculture, which is key to ensuring European food sovereignty, or is it going to be something else? The second question focuses on food. Do you think that food labeling of products, such as, for example, bee-free honey, that is already available in the EU market, is it sufficiently clear and transparent? Or do you think that information provided to consumers regarding the names of foods needs to be improved in this respect? And if so, how do we do that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. On your question concerning the targeting or the better targeting of the financial support delivered by the CIP, I believe it is important, and that is as well, if I get the conclusions right from the strategic dialogue, that it needs to come to those, firstly, who are active farmers, secondly, to those who are most in need. And most in need is not necessarily a company that has 10,000 of hectares. I think that we agree. So there's a certain degressivity and a certain redistribution will be essential if we take it serious with that conclusion of the strategic dialogue. So there needs to be a reshifting and a redirection. But what will be the exact limits? I think that is difficult to say, because you can have in one sector or with 2 hectares, you can be an active farmer depending on the crop you are doing, and on another member state you wouldn't even be an active farmer. So I think this is very important to consider when we redirect this, that we take as well the territorial approach, because I think our European agriculture is so diverse that one size fits all will be very difficult. And then I think on the labeling issues, I think that we have to do better. We have already an EU-wide obligation for the country of origin labeling when it comes to fresh or chilled meat, for example, for dairy products. We have it also for fresh vegetables and fruits. You mentioned honey as well, and on honey I think we have made now progress as well, but I think we have now as well the percentage of the blends, because I agree, when I used to take a pot of honey, that it was just mentioned EU and non-EU honey. So it's now 5% EU honey in, or 95. I think that was definitely misleading, and I think we can do better there. And I think as well that on blends, that is for me a difficult position, because we know that as well there is a lot of counterfeiting honey, because honey is a product that has a certain cost. So on this qualitative point of view, I think we need to do more as well and control better when it is alterated, for example, with sugar. That is not acceptable and is misleading the consumers.
Thank you very much. And colleague Sergio Berlato, please.
Signor Commissario-designate.
Commissioner-designate, thank you. I think it is a sacrosanct right of our citizens to know whence their food comes, the food that's on their table. And yet often consumers are not in a position to make a choice, even if they could afford to. Many of them simply have to go for the cheapest. But there are other consumers who are able to make choices, and they would be prepared to pay more money to get quality products which come with certificates, product guarantees of origin, and proper labelling, which should be mandatory. So I would like to know what your plans are. How do you intend to provide adequate and better information for the consumers so that they're in a position to make the choices that they want to make, and so our farmers can enjoy a better income? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Berlato, for this important question, which goes a little bit into the direction of the colleague just asking the question. I think it was the labeling issues. It is, and I have to say that it is not my entire responsibility as future commissioner, as far as I know. But I think it will. What is must be at the heart is that. The consumers are not misled by information that is on the package. I think that is the very first. The consumer needs to get a better information, and he shouldn't be confused with false allegations, because there are as well some voluntary labeling that is sometimes misleading, and makes people think that the product is more sustainable like others, and in the end that is not the case. And I think that is something where we have to work. We have so many voluntary labels that are not harmonized, so I think we have to make a streamlining exercise of what is out there and to see a little bit that we have more coherence that is as well in the interest for not only of the consumer but as well in the interest of the internal market that would work better. And I think this would as well help our companies to deal better with it, especially when I'm coming from a very small country, when we need to label. Of course, this is very tricky when you are have to deliver to several countries. When you are just one company delivering to one single country, it might be easier. So I think the internal aspect is very important. Then I think we need to have a thorough discussion before we go to a front of package labeling. I think that is something we shouldn't go too quick, and we have to see as well there what is the cost of it, because we are talking about affordable food. Well, if the food gets more expensive to that, I have a problem with it. We have companies, small and medium-sized enterprises, that need to comply with all those packaging rules. We need to take this into account before we take the decisions, because I don't want our overburden our small SMEs, and I don't want our consumers to be misled and pay higher prices.
Asger Christensen, please.
Fra dansk side ser vi meget frem til.
Thank you very much. When it comes to Denmark, we are very interested to see that we've got a new Commissioner for Agriculture and Food. And this is going to be interesting, particularly looking at the new structure we've got for carbon farming and eco schemes. I was wondering specifically what you plan on doing to reduce CO2 emissions in our farming, also ensuring sustainability for the future of our farmers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Christensen. And indeed, the emission part of our agriculture and food sector is always in the focus. I would just like to remind a few figures. The EU agriculture sector stands for 11% of the global European greenhouse gas emissions, just to give you a relation to that. And 85% of those 11% are done by our livestock sector. So I think we know where we have to do more work, and this is on the livestock sector. But on the other hand, I think it is very important to say as well that our livestock in the European Union is declining. The last 10 years, we have minus 7.8% livestock in the European Union. And I know it from experience. My brother died last year. He had cattle. Nobody took it over. So the cattle is really going down as well for such reasons. And I really believe we have to be careful what we are doing. But we need to fix the problem where it is the most important. And we know that there are certain regions in the European Union where the density is very high and the negative externalities are very high as well. We need to go firstly with technical solutions before imposing blunt cuts. I think that would be very important. And then as well see how this can be financed. We need to do more on the research and innovation part. I think that is very important as well. And also we need to look into, for example, food additives that can help as well. And this is something that is already being developed. I wouldn't close any of those doors before that. And then it is important to say as well here, not one size fits all, because when you are in the mountains here in the European Union or the Ardennes, the most sustainable you can do is livestock, and that needs to be acknowledged. Even biodiversity is enhanced. That we should keep in mind as well, and not have addressed the problem where it lies, and not squeeze everybody out and helping nobody in the end.
Paulo de Nascimento Cabral.
Muito obrigado. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Commissioner, first and foremost, welcome for this hearing. I hope that after my question, I will be in a position to wish you the best in your work. Now, you mentioned in your introductory remarks the importance of farming for rural communities, vibrant communities, as well as outermost regions. And I'd like to refer to POSEI. The POSEI program has been in place for some 20 years, and we know that it is contribute to something around, it is actually dropped to only about 30%, which is unfortunate. Now, the European Parliament has been defending the implementation of POSEI, and yet nothing has happened. Would you work with local authorities to make sure that it is implemented, with them to make sure that all of the programs are implemented fully? And when it comes to the EAFRD program, what will you do to support that? I'd also like to draw your attention to Madeira and the Azores. They need to have equitable access to the European market in terms of competitiveness, just like other farmers do. So I'd like to hear you on that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Do Nascimento. I have explicitly mentioned the outermost regions. I know you are not the only one. Mr. Rodriguez is as well coming from such a region, so I have been made aware as well, and several others in the room, I don't know everybody, but are coming from regions with special needs. And I think as well that the treaties require us to give as well a special attention and do special efforts, because not only because of distance you are further away, so energy costs impact directly your production, all the input costs, and as well when you resell the product. So this is the first part. And then secondly, as well, you are sometimes in different climatic zones. So as well there you have special attention and special needs. And I think we have to support them. So I stand fully behind the POSEI, and I also see it as a necessity to protect our traditional landscapes for which you are worldwide famous. I think that is very important. Indeed, for POSEI, from 2021 to 2027, the amounts have been maintained, and this. You might say it is not enough, but in other regions it has been cut. So that is why it is still not, it could have come worse. But I think the European Commission has as well launched an evaluation of the POSEI in 2022. And this evaluation needs to guarantee long-term security of the agri-food sector in our outermost regions, and I will stand very strongly that its effectiveness and as well the global amount will at least be maintained. I think that is very important to say. I will fight for you in that case.
And Andre Rodriguez, please.
Thank you very much, Commissioner-designate. Rural areas and farming face big challenges, meaning that we need the right policies. Therefore, what are the principal measures that you will promote to support those rural areas? My colleague spoke about POSEI, but I hope that we can count on your support in bolstering this program and making sure that the regions have full participation in a future CAP. When it comes to the vision for agriculture, for sustainability and a fair income for farmers, as well as fighting climate change, we have a specific calendar and targets. What specific policy proposals will you make? What measures will you take with local and regional authorities in order to implement these regional programs? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. That is very broad as well, and I think we have in general the issue that our rural areas are getting less and less attractive, especially when we speak about the generation renewal in the agri-food sector. We have a problem not only because companies and enterprises are not viable, but as well, and I mentioned it in my introductory speech, that simple needs and opportunities are not there in the rural area. And I think that is something where the CAP, and especially the second pillar of the CAP, together with cohesion funds, of course, can contribute to make our rural areas more lively. And I think it is very important, and I said that in the beginning as well, because we have huge differences from region to region in the European Union. We are talking now about outermost regions, which I know honestly a little bit less than some of the continental European. I definitely need to be as well on the spot to see with the regions where are the missing links, and I will promise you that I do that, and that I will as well in my mandate be around and not only in the Brussels office. That will be very important to see what can be done. Then on the specific calendar now, I think we have of course, some things that are quite fixed. We will have discussions on the MFF that will be by the end of next year. At the same time, we will work on the reform and start the reform works of the Common Agriculture Policy. But before that, we have also the first deliverables, which will be the vision for agriculture. And I think it will be very important to bring those elements as well in. And I'm at your disposal, and I will contact many of you, because I know you now from meetings and bilaterals we had, to get your special input in there, because I think we need to make sure that this vision is as well not something where I just think about it, but it needs to be something that is workable for all our regions and the entire agriculture sector.
Colleague Salvatore De Maio.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Commissioner-designate, in the mission letter which you received from Commissioner von der Leyen, you have a very demanding task, which is to improve the lot of farmers in the agri-food chain, to protect them against unfair competition and to make sure that they don't have to sell their products under production cost. Could you tell me a bit more about the specific strategies you envisage? How do you intend to improve their situation in terms of their position vis-à-vis the large-scale distributors? They need to be properly remunerated. They need to be able to sell at a realistic price, bearing in mind the challenges of the sector and bearing in mind also the exigencies of sustainability. I would also like to know whether the Commission intends, looking at the agri-food sector, to be looking at the wholesale markets and intending to do something there to try to shorten the supply chains and to monitor how the supply chains are working, both from a consumer and producer perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. De Maio, for your question. And I will start by your last remark, how important it is to be as well bring together the final consumer and the primary producer and everything that is in between, because it is the entire value chain. And I think we have to make clear that those value chains are more sustainable as well, economically speaking, and that everybody gets his fair share out of it. And I think one important point is the so-called AFCO, the Agri-Food Chain Observatory, that is aimed to bring more transparency into the supply chains. And if we have that transparency, that increased transparency, I believe that we can as well identify the weak points, the weaker points better, and to find fixes for that. On the other hand, I think we have as well tools that we can do in the short term. I mentioned already the reform or the targeted reform of the Common Markets Organization to reinforce producer organizations, which will deliver better prices for our farmers in the end. That will be a very first deliverable, and therefore we don't have to wait for the reform. Of course, after that, in the frame of the CAP reform, we will look at the CMO again, but I think here we can do some targeted amendments to help. We have the Unfair Trading Practices Directive with the margin for improvement when it comes to cross-border implementation. That will be crucial, and those are the first big steps that I will do. But of course, I will discuss this very intensively as well at the follow-up that will be given to the strategic dialogue, the European Board on Agriculture and Food, because there everybody is sitting on the table, from the workers to the agriculturists, to the consumers, to the processors. Everybody is on board, and I think it needs to be a solution that works for the entire chain and not only just one part of it.
Děkuji. Katarína Roth-Nevedělová, prosím.
Děkuji velmi pěkně, paní předsednička. Pan kolega Hansen musí být...
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I've got 5 questions. You come from Luxembourg. Luxembourg is a small country, but I understand that your cousin is the Minister for Agriculture. Can you assure us that you are actually going to be representing all citizens and not just people from Luxembourg? Because commissioners are meant to be representing all citizens, including Eastern Europeans, who make up a quarter of EU citizens. Now, your answer in response to that before wasn't satisfactory to me, and so I've got particular interest in that, particularly in relation to payments. We believe our payments should be the same as payments in other countries. And then my next question is, you were talking about new priorities for Eastern European countries in the future, and I was wondering what exactly those might be. You know that sugar beet and wheat are major products from our areas, and these are products which are coming now from Ukraine, and I would like to know how you intend to protect us against these negative trends in the future.
Thank you very much for your 5 questions. I will try to deal with those in the 2 minutes. Firstly, on the sensitive products, I think I already replied to that we have safeguards for several products already in place. That is very important, that we monitor the markets and that we get as well safeguards up and running. That will be very important. So this is not just sugar beet, but we have as well other critical sectors where we need to address it. Then on the convergence of payments, I was last time here in the European Parliament when we negotiated the reform, and some of you can still lively remember this. There was a strong will here in the European Parliament to go into that direction, but the member states, not the Commission and not this Parliament, the member states were not agreeing on that. So I think there you have your solution or your address when you want to address this, because I will fight for this as the previous commissioner did as well. But in the end, it's the co-legislators that decide, and this is how it works. Then you were minimizing a little bit my origin, if that helps you. My mom is Dutch as well, so I can speak Dutch to you as well if you prefer, but I think you shouldn't minimize somebody just because of his origin. My brother used to be a farmer on the Belgian border, so he farmed as well, not only in Luxembourg, but as well in Belgium. And then on your first remark about my cousin, you know, I have, my mom were 8 children, my father were 8 children, and we are 7 children. So it is very likely, and we will come from a farming community, so it is very likely that somebody of your family is in that business. I have, by the way, as well a cousin in the Netherlands who is a socialist, but he is a mayor in that community. So you will have a lot of those interactions. But if that reassures you, I will have as well to give an oath before the European Court of Justice, and I will do my job as a European Commissioner for the agriculture and food sector, and not as a Luxembourger or whatever else, or half Dutch or whatever you want to call me. Thank you.
Mireia Boras Pabon.
Ahora. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Hansen, for this hearing. We're in the Agri Committee following Dana and that tragedy. The first thing I should like to do is thank everyone who tried to assist the farmers that came in their tractors to help the Valencian people in the face of the incomprehensible lack of action by the government and Mr. Sanchez. Now, we need to make sure that we do everything necessary to right this wrong. We know the regions that are affected have lost everything. In this sense, how will you simplify and make more flexible the CAP to make sure that support gets there as quickly as possible? And how do you plan to increase mitigation and adaptation in the face of the upcoming climate challenges? We know that we have had irresponsible green policy, including the nature restoration policy with the rising of rivers. This is fanaticism. Will you, sir, propose in response to that to assist those who work in the fields and all of those who are not protected? Also, what should the wolves and protection for wolves be so that we can protect our livestock raisers? Thank you.
Thank you very much for those questions. First of all, I will not comment on the crisis management. That is not up to me. And I think we should take care of the victims all together and not blame one or the other. I think this is not being helpful at all. Second point, I think we have our European response mechanisms that are being deployed. That is very important. We have given support as well with the European Solidarity Fund. We have the cohesion funds are now flexibilized, which can give additional support. And we have as well the Recovery and Resilience Facility that is deployed. So this comes additional to the instruments that we have under the Common Agriculture Policy, like, for example, the restoration of production potential that is deployed not only there in Spain, but I look at my colleague from Las Palmas, Mr. Mato, where the banana productions, for example, have been destroyed by an eruption of a volcanic eruption. So this is as well done for that. But of course, I think we have it very clear that we have crises that are becoming ever more frequent, and we need to step up our tools, therefore. And I think there lies a lot of response in the Minister report that has been published last week, not only for the agricultural sector, but as well including the agriculture sector. And I think there as well, farmers will be key. Farmers are the first to suffer consequences from climate change, and that is a reality, but they are as well our best defenders, and they want to contribute. We need to give them the right incentives that they can assist that, and you have seen it as well, and I saw the images as well, how farmers are willing to help in the catastrophes. They were on the streets with their tractors to help people, and that is really gives me my deepest respect for the agriculture community in the Valencia region that help and stick together, and that is the most important, to come out of that crisis the strongest possible.
Maria Neuchel.
Ganz herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much indeed, Commissioner-designate. Thank you for being here and answering these questions. I'd like to make 5 points. Number one, what are you going to do to stop exploitation of labour in agriculture? There are umpteen examples of good jobs in farming, but there are also farmers who are exploiting workers. So what are you going to do to tackle that? Secondly, how are you going to accelerate our progress towards more sustainability in food? We need a much better system. Looking at what's happened in Spain, it's important for us to achieve this as fast as possible. So how do you intend to accelerate progress here? Third question, I'm in the Women's Committee too. What are you going to do to promote women in farming? First step, and maybe somewhere too. Then fourthly, what are you going to do about animal welfare? The whole question of animal transport to third countries, for example. What will be your first steps there? And my final question, what are going to be your first steps on subsidies, which obviously can't deal with market failure. Market failure has to be tackled from a different angle, you say. So what do you intend to do? Thank you. 5 questions in 2 minutes. Well, I shall do my best. First of all, I think it's very important for us to heed the warnings that we have seen and heard all too loudly and clearly. We have to take them eminently seriously. But I will also say that agriculture is not the only sector which generates CA2 and emits CO2. There's a report which has been sent to the by the Commission to the Parliament, I think it was last week, which indicates clearly, looking at 2025 to 2030, agriculture should be cutting a certain amount, but it has certainly cut more than transport, which is only 1%. And therefore, I think that that's something which is worth taking note of. Agriculture is doing its part. Agriculture also has got to be supported in this, because we can't just cross our fingers and hope that production will shift automatically to the optimal place. Women in farming, yes, this is a huge problem. I've referred to this already, because there aren't enough women in farming, full stop. I think it's less than 1/3 of the farms that are actually run by women, and it's much more difficult for them, systematically more difficult for them, particularly if they're young women, to access funding. It's difficult for them to get the requisite investment, to deal with the banks, to get the money that they need, and this is something the member states could be addressing. In Spain, for example, there is more support for young female farmers. Right from the beginning, they're given support to set up, and it's ongoing support. And as Mr. Flanagan has said, in his country too, in Ireland, there is better support for young women farmers. And therefore, we need to learn from these good examples. I'm very sorry that I've exhausted my 2 minutes and I haven't finished with the questions, but I've done my best.
Colleague Toveri.
Thank you, Chair. Dear Commissioner-designate, even though forestry is not in your portfolio, it can't be bypassed today. Forest and the entire forest-based value chain are a crucial part of rural areas. Forests provide jobs, ensure economic welfare, store carbon, offer health benefits and combat desertification. The EPP believes that the best know-how for sustainable forest management lies within the member states like Finland, which is 75% covered by forests. We respect the member states' competence on forest-related legislation. Forestry and forest-related economy is of vital importance and a big part of income for many farmers and rural communities in many EU member states. Forestry is a national competence and it should remain like that. However, different EU policies, mainly environmental ones, diminish this competence, set limitations and give unnecessary bureaucratic burden to forest owners, SMEs and the whole forest-related value chain, including agriculture. Mr. Commissioner-designate, how will you act to safeguard that the real competence of the member states is utilised, and how will you help to secure the economic sustainability of European forestry? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Toveri, for that question, which rejoins a little bit the question earlier on from Mrs. Singer from Renew when it comes to forests. And I think it is right to say that a lot of competences, or most of the competences for forests, lie with the member states. But on the other hand, also, and I mentioned it, many farmers are forest owners, so they are a little bit in the same boats. And then I believe that we have to find the right balance between what is doing, are the member states doing, because we have as well, let's say, the environmental rules, for example, that apply as well to forests, but they are European legislation. So I think we need to find the right balance there. We have also some elements in the common agriculture policy that also are financing projects in agroforestry. I think this needs to be acknowledged. 4.2 billion is the figure, so this is not nothing. So I think we have to at least coordinate way better, and I think this is in the frame of the wider bioeconomy can play a crucial role, because goods produced in forestry could be used in agriculture and vice versa, and this could as well be used for energy generation, etc., and all the applications that are out there. So I think we have to need to have a broader discussion together with the Commissioner for Industry, but as well Commissioner for Environment, and together with the stakeholders, of course, and this Parliament, how can we make this bioeconomy work, that it delivers not only for farmers, for foresters, but as well in general for rural areas, and makes us more independent on certain inputs. And I think there is a huge room for maneuver and for enhancement, and we need to design this together. So I would rejoin a little bit the idea that Mrs. Singer said as well, to have more discussion and exchange. It doesn't have to be a formalized strategic dialogue like we had for agriculture, but I think that would be a good way forward to go together and identify ways to make this bioeconomy work with foresters.
Per Holmgren.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Hansen. First of all, the EU Court of Auditors' latest reports on the CAP's environmental performance is not, as you say, that the current CAP is on the right track. Also, your repeated attribution of 1/3 of the EU budget to environment protection is at odds with their conclusions, as that 1/3 depends on the conditionality that actually was slashed in what was called simplification back in March, when climate adaptation rules like soil protection were cut. Does that mean simplification means less protection against floods and droughts? Second, will you, as recommended by the Court of Auditors, set quantified climate and environmental targets for the next CAP? What about a target for the reduction of pesticides, as one example? And third, did we hear correctly that you would propose mandatory capping to limit the unfair distribution of payments and free up money for critically needed climate and environmental measures? If so, at what level? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Holmgren. A lot of questions in one question. On the 1/3, well, where does this come from? I think it is important to say that we have 70% of the EU agriculture land is under eco-schemes. 90% is under conditionality. So this is very important to acknowledge. And the same report as I was referring to is not only saying we have -2% greenhouse gas emissions from 22 to 23. It says as well that we are on track to meet our 2030 objective contribution. So this is an official document, and it has been sent as well to the European Parliament last week. So for me, it is very important to put this right. Then, of course, how do we better assess? Because that is sometimes the problem at farm level. What is the progress actually made? And there, I think it is very important that we go into the direction of an on-farm benchmarking system to better assess this. This needs to be discussed, of course, with the farmers, because there is not one farm identically to the other, not one sector identically to the other. So I think this data collection will be very key to assess progress and identify as well future ways to go to. Then on the question on I was not saying that I will impose capping. You know, how does it work, the legislative process? I think we have to work on that, but because for me it is very clear that as from a certain point you don't need the same amount per hectare as you would need for the first 10, 15 or whatever hectares. So this is the key point. And if we get this digressivity right, that would already help a lot, in my opinion. Then on your question on pesticides, of course, we have to, I think all the farmers, and I say they want to reduce it, but they need the alternatives, because for them, buy the product, spray the product is expensive, and that is something they don't want to do. But the crop needs to be in some way protected. So we need to speed up the alternatives before we take products out, and then we need as well to support investments in innovation, not only in biocontrol, but as well in some machinery that will be helpful to reduce. There are ways farming, precision farming is one of them, but this costs money, this costs innovation, and we need to deploy it. And we have this investment gap. I mentioned it, 62 billion, that needs to be blocked, that hole.
Thank you. Anna Zalewska, please.
candidate commissioner, if you become commissioner, I invite you during the first 100 days to the Polish-Ukrainian border so you can see the true situation, how the liberalization of trade and European decision, how those affect the Polish market and the European market. Farmers are angry. We need to talk to them, and I hope sincerely that you will hold such meetings and visits because this requires attention. At the same time, farmers took to the streets because it's more and more difficult for them to work. It's not only red tape, but other burdens. You mentioned strategic dialogue. Why are we not talking about what worries farmers? You want to include farming in the ETS system. Can you imagine that they will be taxed, that meat would be taxed at a moment in time where you are speaking positively of the Mercosur agreement? It sounded in a way as if you have already made your decision. In this connection, please reply the questions I just posed. Thank you.
First of all, I think I have made a balanced approach on the Mercosur agreement, saying that there are advantages, but there are clear challenges, and I rightly highlighted as well the problems that, for example, we face with meat that is not produced in the same manner as we produce, for example, Brazil. I mentioned it, so I think it was very, very clear. But as well, we have an export an agro-industry export that is largely benefiting. So I wanted to show you the two sides of the same coin, which is one side a challenge for certain sectors, but the opportunity for another part of the agriculture sector. So this was my intention. I didn't say that I want an ETS. I say for agriculture, I say that this was very unclear in the strategic dialogue, firstly. And secondly, we have, for example, New Zealand tried to do something like that, but they abandoned it for a reason. New Zealand is known as being a very environmental progressive country. I want to know why they abandoned it. You talked about taxes. We have some Danish colleagues inside where in Denmark they are trying to do so. I will look at that, how it works, but I believe that it is an ETS for agriculture is not the way forward because it will be administratively hugely challenging. 9 million farms in the European Union of size from 0.5 hectares to some thousands of hectares. That is not possible. Who is going to pay for the goods afterwards? It is the consumer. If we make it more expensive, it is the farmer who does the administrative work. So I'm not convinced it is the right way forward, but that is the discussion that is going. That is my personal opinion, and I wanted to clarify that. Then on the Ukrainian-Polish border, I've traveled the last time, it was in February when I crossed the border to Kiev, namely in Poland, so I have seen the situation, but I'm fully aware of that. And that is what I mean when I say that we need to look at these autonomous trade measures, what is currently working and what is not working, and I believe that we need to learn the lessons from it. And I will come to the border. I invite you to invite me. I will do so and take the challenges on board. But you know, this is not just the agriculture sector. This is generally trade as well. And I want to be on the ground, and I will do so.
It's here. Yeah. And now, colleague Barry Coven, please. I forgot where we are.
At Renew, we're seeking a stronger budget for CAP. It must be more true to its original remit, supporting farm income and bolstering food production systems across Europe, with no more conditionality than already provided for to date. That said, though, we do need concrete eco and enviro incentives to support new sustainable farming practices and to encourage the access to and uptake of such practices and techniques. I'd argue for a distinct funding pillar, separate from CAP, and after what I heard from you earlier, may be funded by the EIB funds, by Next Generation funding and Just Transition funds, which should and would reward those that recognise, realise and achieve best practices, for example, in the likes of carbon sequestration, on-farm power generation to national grids, carbon trading, also rewarding the delivery of and implementation on new innovations around genomics, fertilisers and foodstuffs, for example, with bonuses and rewards for meeting targets, and also bonuses and rewards for such incentives and initiatives that are realised that are linked to generation renewal. So What I want to ask you is, will you, within the first 100 days, put forward concrete, measurable steps to deliver on such goals as I've outlined?
Thank you, Mr. Cohen, for your questions. And I think it is very important I might be repetitive, but I think it is important. I would like to have the strongest possible budget for our farmers, of course. But I'm not the only one who is going to decide that. I will argue that case very strongly, and I will do it with all my efforts in the future college. But of course, we know that there are different political priorities in the European Union, and I cannot say that I will reach this or that target. That is simply not in my hands, and it is not to my use that I promise things that I can't keep in the end. So I will fight for it. But what I did on the result, there, of course, I'm not the only captain on board when it comes to that. Then on your second question, or related question, is on the incentives, and that you say that we need alternative financing, not only from EIB, like I mentioned it earlier, but as well that we look into how can environmental, let's take, for example, the nature restoration law. I take that as an example because in the strategic dialogue, the report said that we need an extra funding for that. That is, of course, something where I say, okay, that's good to ask for, but where is the money coming from? And that is, of course, something where I would prefer, where we could do something on the short term. On the short term, we have the Just Transition Fund. That is so underused for the very moment that we need to make this fund that exists already before we argue for a new one, make it accessible for the farming sector. That will be crucial, and that could as well deliver on the short term, and that would be my preferred version, because I think farmers don't have the time to wait. What will be coming out of this MFF negotiation is a Pandora box, because there are so many cooks that are on that same stove. So I think that is, I think it is important to seize the opportunities that are there and not promise things that sound good but are not achievable in the short term. Thank you.
Okay. Maria Welsh, please.
Thank you, Commissioner-designate. I have a very serious topic to discuss that hasn't been addressed quite yet. Suicide rates of our farmers can be 20% higher than the national average. Research by Dr. Thomas Russell and Professor McHugh from University of Dublin in Ireland outlines that 22.8% of Irish farmers last year are at risk of suicide, with top stressors including national and EU policies that we design here, the perception that they are to blame for the climate crisis, and concerns over the future of their farms, especially in the lack of focus on generation renewal, which you've mentioned this evening. In 2023, the Commission had a communication on mental health and recognised that rural communities, including farmers, have extremely limited access to mental health services. Training programmes for agricultural workers should include mental health awareness and stress management techniques. And my question to you is this: can you commit to ensuring mental health is a political priority for our farmers in rural communities? What specific measures can you implement to protect and promote mental and physical health of our farmers, ensuring that they receive the appropriate measures they need? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria, for this question. I have a little problem to reply to this question, I have to say. Because my brother, who took over our family farm, died last year in an accident at his home. He was 55 years old, and he fell in the stairs. This is not because of mental health directly that he is dead. It was an accident. But I'm sure it is caused by many factors that impact the rural areas and impact our farmers, because they are under pressure. They have financial issues that they can't cope with. They have huge investments. They have subsidies that are not paid in time, and the bank doesn't forgive any delay. And they don't have access, and they don't have time for that, to go to consult somebody. What my brother did, he went to see my mom to have a cup of coffee. Yes, that's good, but that is not being helpful. And I think in this case, if appropriate, service and help would have been available, he wouldn't have or would have gone out earlier, because he stopped at some point milk production, because you know how it is when you don't have a robot. It's 7 days a week, it's 24 hours, and he got divorced, everything together. And when you are in such a situation, you work 14 hours a day, and I think, sorry, I'm not good now to reply to that, but we need to know more. We have our CIP network, and we need to bring services to those farmers that are very, let's say, they don't want to speak. Nobody wants to speak if he has issues and pressures and everything. But those people are under particular pressure, and we need to take them into account, and we need to do so better, because suicide rate, you mentioned it, but there are as well many others that suffer accidents because they don't get to sleep, because they don't get to rest for a moment. They can't switch off at any moment, because they can't even go to holidays to 3 days. When my brother got married, I took care of his cows for 3 days, and he called me 3 times a day because he trusted me, but nonetheless, it's a stress permanently, and you never get off of it, and we need to deal with it, and we need to acknowledge it, and that those people earn 60% of a year average. It is unacceptable, and is killing me. Sorry.
Giuseppe Antocci.
Grazie Presidente, signor.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Commissioner-designate, we have an ongoing battle against organised crime in Italy, and it costs many lives, and it has shown us exactly how the mafia can infiltrate land ownership structures, how it can distort agricultural production, it can usurp it, and it can profit criminally from the CAP. It then goes on to replicate crimes in other countries where the legislative structures are less robust, and it continues to profit from the EU funds illicitly. We therefore need to address this urgently, because young people are also put off going into agriculture. It's not just a question of the monetary aspect. This is a terrible set of circumstances, and therefore I would like to know what you intend to do to protect our farmers, to protect them against organised crime, which is encroaching more and more on their land and their livelihood. How do you intend to ensure that the CAP resources are managed better, so that agriculture can actually be re-established as an attractive prospect for the young generations, with a secure and prosperous livelihood to hope for? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Antocci, for your question. On the issue specifically in Italy, I have to say that I'm not aware of the details of that situation involving mafia involvement, so I cannot comment directly on that, but believe me that I will, of course, have a look to that, because the access to land is one of the key barriers that our young farmers face to start with agriculture production. And I think it is very important that we bring more transparency into that land market, not only because we have spoken earlier on as well about the problem that certain billionaires or companies belonging to billionaires have access or massively access to CIP funds, but as well that in the case that you mean that young farmers don't even get the chance. So I think this is really crucial, and I think that the Land Observatory that I have announced earlier on will bring more light into the shed that we of this land market, not only I don't say that only because of the situation you mean, but as well we have a lot of foreign investments in European agricultural land where we risk to give away our production potential, which is our fertile soil, to third countries. And I think this is not at all in line as well with the Nini's report on the security. And there we need as well to maintain the security of production in the European Union. And I think this is one of the ways where we should go to bring this into the light, and access, by the way, then as well, grant better access for young farmers to farming land.
Thank you very much. And we now move to the questions from the invited committees. I now give the floor to Antonio De Caro, Chair of Envy Committee, please.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Chair. In the recent report on the functioning of the LULUCF regulation, the Commission highlighted the worrying dimension of methane emissions coming from agriculture. In your replies to the written questions, you indicated that the livestock sector must pursue its transition to more sustainable practices. How do you want to achieve this transition and reduce greenhouse gas emissions from this sector? And also, with regard to forestry, the Commission stated that the LULUCF sinks are worryingly decreasing. So which forestry and agricultural measures do you intend to put in place in order to strengthen the important role of forests and other lands as carbon sinks and to reverse the current trend? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. De Caro, for this question on behalf of the ENVI Committee. I believe it is very important, and I underlined it earlier on, that 11% of the EU greenhouse gas emissions are indeed caused by the agriculture sector, out of which 85% are caused by the livestock sector. So I think it is very clear that we have to do there. On the other hand, we have as well a decrease in livestock. That over the last 10 years, the livestock in the European Union has decreased by 7.8%, while consumption of meat, it has little bit switched in the kind of meat. People eat more chicken, eat less red meat, but the meat consumption remains the same. Nonetheless, livestock is going down by 7.8% over the last 10 years, and the trend seems to go into the same direction. Then I mentioned also the data from the EU Climate Action Report, minus 2% in the agriculture sector. Other sectors like transport have done weaker. So I think we really see that livestock has problems, especially in the high density areas, and that we need tailored approaches there to see how we can, because those are usually quite big installations. There it is easier to capture as well and to deal with the negative outcome of livestock. It is easier than, for example, in the Austrian mountains, where some cows graze on the mountains, and I think that is something where we need a tailored approach. Then, of course, I think we also need to design our and this will be part of the vision, because in the vision for the future of agriculture and food will be a point on the livestock strategy, and as well it should be give as well stability and predictability to the sector. That's very important. We will develop as well the on-farm benchmarking system that will help to assess properly as well the outcomes. And then just what we are on the forests, I think we need to see it together with agriculture as a wider contribution to the bioeconomy, where we can as well have projects that clearly help to reduce emissions, to produce bioenergy, etc. So there are a lot of ways forward, but this needs to happen in a sustainable manner, and that's why we need to speak together, not only with the Agriculture Committee, but as well very strongly with the Environment Committee.
And now, Chair of the PECH Committee, Madam Carmen Crespo-Diaz.
Gracias, Presidenta. Thank you, Chair. Mr. HANSEN, for food, livestock, and farming is fundamental, but fishing is too. And in this sense, Europe is far from making sure that it is meeting the mark. It imports some 70% of its products. Moreover, the pandemic impacted our fisheries, and we know that there has been a drop in consumption. how will we address the issue of products from abroad? We have much in terms of imports, and we have to put an end to this. To support our food security, fishing is important for good health in Europe. In this vision that we have for food, we would like fishing to be included in that. What will you do to reinforce food security for products from the sea included in this vision, as well as the requirements that are applied to put an end to unfair trade when it comes to imported products? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Crespo, for that question. Indeed, on fisheries, I'm not the big expert coming from a landlocked country, so indeed there I need to do my homework, but I have as well looked into this very intensively over the last weeks because, as you rightly mentioned, 70% of the fish, and we consume a lot of fish in the European Union, is coming from third countries. So I think there is a huge margin for improvement, and I think we have as well already done some progress because fresh fish and fish needs to be labeled when it's in the pure form with the origin. This is, I think, it is a good first step, but I think we can do more, and we should as well look into processed seafood that is being used in several processed foods. So if it is in the European Union's and the fishermen and fisherwomen interest to label as well those let's say processed food where it is an ingredient, I think we need to do a thorough impact assessment as well, because it needs to help the consumers. But if the consumer is rightly informed, I think he can make as well better choices for sustainable fishing and as well for European fishing to support more actively our fishermen community. And I think we have as well to further promote the blue economy. It is on a good track, but we can do more. We have also, I think, a little bit side effects. We have of course, the European Fisheries Fund, but we have as well the Rural Development Fund, where I think there can be interactions as well, where we help in general rural communities, and I think there is something more to be done. And then, of course, I think what needs to be done, but this will rather be the part from my trade colleague, is as well the access to the fisheries grounds, because this is as well a very crucial topic. Because there as well fishermen need predictability where they can fish and where they cannot.
Thank you very much. And we are going to start with the final round now, but I have to inform you that we are really have big problem with time. That is the reason I would like to ask our members to be as short as possible, so to have only one question. And Mr. Hansen, I have to give you a limit, maximal 1.5 minutes for your answer. Thank you. So, and we will start with Luke Flanagan.
Thank you very much. I've listened with great interest to what you've said throughout this hearing. It is now reported widely that, as a result of what you've said earlier, that you support the Mercosur agreement. It is also clear from listening to you that when it comes to money for nature restoration, we're going to have to rely on private money for public goods that isn't guaranteed through the EIB. I'm also hearing that when it comes to an increased cap, there isn't much hope. When it comes to unfair trading practices, it hasn't been going on for long enough, this new regulation, and you basically can't say whether it's working or not, even though it's quite clear that as long as it's voluntary for people to engage on the UTP, it's never going to happen. So can you give us some good news, please? Because mental health was touched on here.
I'm sorry, I am going to cut it because we are really out of time. Sorry.
I will try to be very brief on the unfair trading practices. I think I have made it very clear. It is a very recent legislation that you adopted in this parliament. It is now up and running, but we already see that there are problems, namely when it comes to cross-border enforcement. And I think I was very clear when I said as well that we will address this, and I will put this on the table on the first days of my hopefully mandate. Then we get more than 1.5 minutes to talk about, but I was very clear that I will do that because it will as well help fight that selling below production price is going to be systematic, so that is very clear. Then on the nature restoration law, what I clearly said is that asked by the strategic dialogue was an additional separate budget, but if you see it somewhere, please let me know and I will argue for that one, but I don't see it currently. I see, nevertheless, existing funds like the Just Transition Fund that could be leveraged for that and that are underused for the very moment. So I would go into that because it is immediately available and we don't have to fight with the member states on that. So that would be deliverable. I don't have the time anymore if it's there. On Mercosur, I was having a very balanced approach, saying that there are safeguards, that there are advantages, that there are threats, and that we need to properly address them. And this will be as well the task of this parliament to address and assess and analyze what is currently being negotiated, and that needs to be done in the due time and the necessary time and properly.
Okay, thank you, David Corman, and I really remind you that I will cut you in 1 minute, okay?
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Commissioner-designate, Mr. HANSEN. There have been 8 questions on free trade agreements and Mercosur from 5 different groups, and you've answered all these questions. But I think Mr. Šefčovič has also spoken about this during his hearing and apparently said that there wasn't likely to be a split, which would mean that the national parliament votes could actually be skirted around. On biodiversity and biomatters, could you tell me who's going to be responsible for biomatters? We've been told by the court that we are way behind on our targets, but either we need to speed up or we need to restructure. So can you perhaps reassure us that you are going to take charge of this, that you're going to be the Commissioner for Agriculture and that you'll be taking charge of organic agriculture? Thank you very much. I'll start with the second one first, on organic agriculture. Yes, we are certainly keen to promote organic farming in our strategic planning, and we're encompassing all the member states in that too, because they, at national level, have a plan to develop organic farming. So this is something which is well within our remit. But you're right that over and above that, it's DG Sante that has the overall responsibility for some aspects here, and therefore we do need to work on this and see whether it would make more sense for it to be in one portfolio. The mission letters are not completely clear-cut in terms of the specific allocation of responsibilities for certain matters. You've raised the question, and we will see how things shake down. But this is a public hearing, and in due course you will, I'm sure, get all the requisite information. As to what Mr. Šefčovič said during his hearing, I was already during working a preparation session for my own hearing, and I didn't see what Mr. Mikulev said either, or Mr. Šefčovič, but I don't quite know how they presented these issues. But Mr. Šefčovič is overall responsible for this, and our responsibility lies more in specific areas, such as, for example, negotiation on agricultural topics in the context of forthcoming negotiations. Thank you.
Monsieur le Commissaire.
Commissioner-designate Christophe, we know that securing the supply chain will contribute to improving the resilience of the agricultural sector. The failure of the supply chain, particularly in the fertilizer sector, was devastating in 2022. We often know that this exposes a vulnerability of the agricultural sector in particular. And so my question to you is a very simple one. What initiatives do you intend to enact in order to achieve more predictability in the agricultural sector? Thank you. Thank you very much, Charles, for your question. I'm not going to respond in Luxembourgish, but in French. I think you're absolutely right. We do have a major problem with how dependent we are for our inputs for agricultural production. On the one hand, of course, we've got energy, where prices have raised significantly. And then we've also got the price of fertilizer, which, as you've said, has gone up a lot as well. Partly because of increasing energy prices in the EU, partly because of sanctions against Russia. And now we're also seeing that a high percentage of fertilizers that are still coming to us from Russia have also become more expensive. And we've got a very serious problem. So we need to try to get more stable partnerships in the supply chain. We've got an agreement with Morocco, which of course brings with it its own issues, and I know my Spanish colleagues are very aware of that, but it is another major supplier. And so I think we need to look to diversification of our production, and we need to ensure that we're less dependent on just one destination, because that is a very risky approach. And I think this kind of diversification will give us greater predictability and greater certainty for our supply in the future. Obviously, we've got the bioeconomy and other sources to look at, and I think there too, there's perhaps quite a lot we can do domestically.
Dank u wel, voorzitter. Meneer de kandidaat.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Commissioner-designate, we need to make farming more attractive to young people. I'm delighted to hear you saying that, because that's extremely important, and it's a big challenge which you're determined to address. You've talked about access to land being a problem, and that's something we clearly need to address. Where I am from, a lot of land has already been withdrawn from agriculture, and planning permission has been given for other purposes. This is something which we have considered in the context of the Nature Restoration Directive. Now, how are young people supposed to be attracted to farming if we don't change the structure extensively? We can't keep taking farming land out of agriculture, and we can't keep setting aside land and putting it into the nature restoration category, which means that it is being removed from productive farming. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reusen. I think it was rather a comment than a question, but I think it is a real concern, not only in your member state, but as well in others, that the access to land is getting increasingly difficult. It is on the one side, of course, because we have demographic evolution, so there is pressure from, let's say, the housing side. In your country, we have a very high population density, so this is of course causing huge problems. And on the other hand, we have as well that, and I remember it in Luxembourg as well, my brother went to an auction to buy land, and there was a big landlord that was going to build something, and he bought the whole 50 hectares just for compensation. That is counterproductive. We need to maintain agricultural land, and as well to delimit at certain points agricultural land. That will be important, because we know that other sectors can pay more than farmers. So I would think as well about initiatives. This has to be done together with the member state, but initiatives to preserve agricultural land, and that there can happen nothing else than agriculture. But the same needs to go as well for nature-based, so we don't need then to grab on other parts that are forests, etc. So we need to be very careful. This is a very difficult balance which needs a lot of adaptation according to the regions.
Willis Christophans.
Sveicināti. Kā jūs plānojat?
Thank you very much. How do you plan on resolving the contradictions of the Green Deal? Allow me to list a few of them. Firstly, arable farmers are being asked to replace ploughing with minimal tillage practices, such as cultivating and disking, in order to reduce emissions, all the while having to spray their fields more often to control weeds and disease, which runs completely counter to the aims of biological diversity. Second, Europe is encouraging farmers to reduce their number of cattle, which will be tough on organic farming, where slurry is the only source of fertilizer. Third, forest owners are being forced to stop the use of old woodland, whilst at the same time new woodland is meant to be being planted to create CO2 sinks. However, if old woodland cannot be cleared, there's simply no land available to plant new trees.
Thank you very much for those comments and questions. I think what must be made very clear, I haven't heard some European legislation, or at least I haven't read that explicitly says you have to reduce your cattle. What is said is that you have to reduce your emissions, your negative output of the agriculture sector, but saying top-down you have to reduce, I haven't read that. That is mainly maybe some political will on certain sides, but it is certainly not in EU legislation. And as I said earlier on as well, cattle and livestock in general has reduced over the last 10 years by 7.8% without that there is such a ban. So it is really difficult to maintain people that are willing to have cattle, because that is something you need to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning if the cow is calving. That is like that, and you need to be, and nobody wants to do that, or less and less people want to do that. So I think it is very important that as well, when we talk about security, that we make sure that still there are some people that are willing to take care of cattle and ensure production, and as well ensure production in remote areas. That will be very crucial. And then on the forest situation that you mentioned, I think this is as well maybe the transposition of EU law, or at least the adaptation nationally, but I don't know the details, but I would be willing if you could send that to me to analyze it.
Eric Sergiacomo.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner-designate, before I begin asking my question, I wanted to state that I was very much touched by the emotion that you showed us earlier. It reminds us that farming is men and women who work hard, too hard frequently, on a daily basis to feed our populations. In your title, there is an addition of food in the title. Unfortunately, we haven't spoken about that much since the outset of our meeting, yet it is important. It seems indispensable to link farming with food and our policy there too. The principal function of our farming for food. We have food insecurity amongst Europeans. We have a destabilization of our economies. We have strategic stocks for upcoming crises. There are so many subjects. If confirmed, what will your priorities be?
Merci, j'avais pas besoin.
Thank you. I didn't need interpreting for the end. Thank you, Mr. Sergiacomo, for your question. I agree fully that agriculture and food production are much more than just the farmers. There is an entire chain. There are a lot of businesses, SMEs, that are processing the products and that are also facing similar challenges, much like our farmers. We must acknowledge this and must support them. I think in our vision, and this is my intention, we should have an economically sustainable, environmentally sustainable, socially sustainable approach. We've spoken of the measures to be taken in some regions and some sectors. It is via personal investment. I think we must do better, because competitiveness, well, we know that the food chain depends on investment that is made in that chain. We see that not just in farming, but we see it also in processing. There just isn't enough investment, and therefore we are not competitive enough, and we're losing markets. We need to, I think, right this, and it's crucial. Moreover, we have many cross-cutting subjects. We spoke much today about animal well-being, for example. We know that our farmers are protecting that well-being of these animals because they love them and they've known them since they were birthed, but also because when the animal comes to the slaughterhouse, the animal must be in good health to have a fair price. And so the farmers must contribute to that, but we need to have, I think, a more holistic approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And colleague, now it's time for... Oh, sorry. Norbert. Norbert, floor is served. I'm sorry.
Vielen Dank, Frau Vorsitzende, Herr designierter Kommissar.
Thank you very much. Commissioner-designate, the privilege of being the last speaker this evening falls to me. We've had terrible harvests this year. We've had huge losses in terms of millions of tons in a number of the areas of the community. Therefore, I'd like to know how you want to balance intensive farming and de-intensification, and I wonder how you intend to ensure that farmers' incomes can be sustained, that harvests can be maintained and sustained. I think these are going to be important challenges for the Commissioner going forward. I think that we have an extremely knowledgeable and communicative, highly qualified and expert candidate here before us this evening, and I would certainly hope that the coordinators will confirm our candidate with a large majority. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Norbert, für deine lieben Worte.
Thank you, and thank you for your very kind closing words. Yes, agriculture is, of course, very close to my heart, as I was born into a farming family and grew up there. So I know that years like this, where there have been problems with the harvest in not only the arable sector, but also the sugar beet sector, because of the lack of ability to use neonicotinoids. Now, this has actually meant that there's been a 40% decline as compared with a normal year. And this means that the farmers' incomes are also 40% lower. So this is something we need to address. We need to consider what the implications of all our decisions are and what the alternatives are. We do need to accelerate much of our decision making, but we do need to do so in full awareness, as Mr. Giacomo has just said, of the implications. We need to maintain price stability and income levels for our farmers. And this is something which is really very important. I think the strategic report has some good pointers there, which in some of the more positive years will, I think, be informative for us. But we are also got to cater for the eventualities where, such as this year, the harvests fall off.
Time conclusion to the conclusion of the meeting, and I would like to ask Mr. HANSEN to make a brief closing statement. So you have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And well, I had the opportunity to meet many of you already before this hearing. Some of you I haven't met yet, but I think we can, of course, and we should definitely do this better in the future. That is really my part of working, and for those who know me longer, I am the one that is coming to the table and that is going to discuss and is not staying away. So this is, for me, very important. I announced it that I would like to be the boots on the ground commissioner, which means that I would like as well to come to see the specific problems, not only come to the big agriculture events when you can have a picture, but as well go to the zones where really disaster happened. And I would like if I'm allowed as well to come to one of my first destinations, to come to the Valencia region to see what has happened and how we can better help. That is really how I would like to work. Then, of course, you have all read my mission letter that I will have to deliver on the first 100 days on my vision for the future of agriculture. I don't want to be that something that I do in isolation, so I will come to you to discuss this. This will as well depend, and the co-legislators definitely have their role to play there. And I think what is very important as well, and I mentioned is to see the agri-food sector as a globality, so with the entire supply chain and value chain, and not only one actor or the other in isolation. That will be very important. Generational renewal, I think I will start, if you give me the opportunity, very early in December as well, with the youth dialogue. That should be very important as well to address and identify issues for our future generations that we want to take up agriculture in the future. And I think in there lies as well a lot of potential. I think we have to make our rural areas more attractive, that young people want to stay there as well, give them other opportunities, because if one person of the family is doing agriculture, maybe the other person wants to stay on the farm but work something else. So we need to give more opportunities. And I think the Common Agriculture Policy is the best possible tool for that. We need fairer revenues for our farmers. I addressed very clearly that I will work on the Common Market Organization to come up with a targeted review in the very first days of the mandate to strengthen our producer organization and give a better position for the farmers in the entire value chain. I have also said that we will address the problems in the Unfair Trading Practices Directive with the cross-border enforcement. That is the first deliverable on there. And then I think we have as well some sectors we haven't talked at all today about. For example, the wine sector is going to a very difficult crisis in this moment because of consumption trends and because of climatic events. So there will be the high-level group on wine, and which will come up with its conclusions. That will be very important as well. We need to prepare better for crisis and ramp up our possibilities that we have. I think we are not already there where we need to be to face the multiple crises, the climatic crisis, the environmental crisis, sanitary crisis, and as well trade disruptions. Therefore, I think we need to do way more, and there I think we have as well to work as a Commission more horizontally together too. That is then maybe in the beginning more difficult to get new legislation out, because you will have to decide or discuss and coordinate with others. But once it gets out, it is not going to be environmental legislation on its own, and it hadn't been discussed with agriculture before. That is not the way forward, and that is something where I will really engage very strongly to have this cooperation, this horizontal cooperation between the different ones. And there was some people that analyzed with how many different commissioners I would have, let's say, cooperations, at least 10, so this will be, of course, challenging, but I think we have to bring it. And we owe it to our farming community, we owe it to our quality food production in the European Union, and I will be there to fight for them, to fight as well, Mr. Flanagan, for a very strong budget, but of course I will need your support, and this is your decision tonight, so thank you very much, and I think I'm almost at the 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would like to thank all the members for their participation, and you, Mr. Hansen, for your informative answers. Your contributions have ensured the success of this hearing. As a next step, the coordinators of the Agri committees and I will meet in camera from 10:30 p.m. to assess the responses. Coordinators will then be invited to stay their opinion whether the Commissioner-designate is qualified both to be a member of the College and to carry out the particular duties he has been assigned. Thank you very much and good evening. Have a nice evening.